Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I woke up because my room felt too quiet. Not silent exactly, just missing something. I usually sleep with a fan on, low setting, just for the background noise. That morning, it was off. I rolled over, still half asleep, and checked my phone. Black screen. At first I thought it had just turned off during the night, but when I pressed the button, nothing happened. No vibration, no low battery symbol. Completely dead. That didn't make sense because it had been plugged in. I sat up and looked over at the outlet. The charger was still connected, cable running up onto the bed. My phone was right where I'd left it. I picked it up. The first thing I noticed was the cable. It was warm. Not hot enough to burn, but definitely warmer than it should have been. Like it had been running power through it for a long time. I unplugged it straight away, more out of instinct than anything. Then I just sat there for a second, holding the phone, trying to wake up properly. I checked the time on my bedside clock, 7:48. I was already running late. I didn't think much more about it at the time, just figured maybe the cable was faulty or the socket had cut out during the night. Stuff like that happens. I swapped to a different charger later that day and the phone turned back on after a few minutes. Battery was completely drained. 0. No weird notifications, no missed calls, nothing unusual. I forgot about it. Until it happened again. 2 nights later, same thing. Woke up, fan off again. Phone dead, cable warm. That's when I started paying attention, because I hadn't turned the fan off. I always leave it on overnight, especially if it's warm. I got out of bed and checked the plug. Everything was still switched on. The fan was plugged in properly. The outlet hadn't tripped. I flicked the fan switch off and on again. It came back to life straight away. No delay, no sign of a power cut. That didn't sit right. I checked my phone again. Still dead. I left it charging on a different cable while I got ready. Later that morning, I checked the battery usage. Nothing unusual. No apps draining power overnight. It just showed a straight drop to 0. That night, I decided to test it. I left my phone plugged in like usual, but I also left a small lamp on, just to see if anything changed. I remember checking the time before going to sleep, 11:36 p.m. Everything was working fine. I woke up again before my alarm. Same feeling, that quiet. The lamp was off. That's what got me first. I sat up straight. The room was darker than it should have been. I reached over and turned the lamp on manually. It worked immediately. Then I grabbed my phone. Dead again. Cable warm. I stared at it for a few seconds, then looked around the room properly. Nothing else seemed out of place, but something felt off. I checked the time on the clock. 7:12. That was earlier than usual. I got out of bed and checked the rest of the house. Everything else had power. The kitchen lights worked, kettle worked, nothing had reset. No sign of any outage. That's when I started feeling uneasy about it, because whatever was happening, it wasn't affecting the whole house. Just my room. That night, I didn't plug my phone in. Left it on the bedside table with about 40% battery. I also left the lamp on again, and I stayed up later than usual, just lying there watching the room. Nothing happened. Eventually, I fell asleep. When I woke up, everything was still on. Lamp still lit, phone still at 39%. That should have been reassuring, but it wasn't, because it felt like whatever had been happening just didn't happen that night, like it had stopped because I was paying attention. The next night, I plugged my phone back in, same setup as before, lamp on, fan on. I went to sleep. Sometime during the night, I woke up. No idea what time it was. I didn't check the clock straight away. I just lay there, eyes open. The room was dark again. Lamp off, fan off. I didn't move. Something felt different this time. Not just quiet. Thick. Like the air itself had weight to it. I reached for my phone. It was dead. The cable felt warmer than before. Almost hot. I unplugged it quickly. And that's when I heard it. A faint sound. Not from outside, from inside the room. A low, steady hum. I froze. It wasn't loud, but it was constant, like something electrical but deeper. I sat up slowly, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It didn't seem to have a direction, just filled the space. I turned my head toward the window. The blinds were closed, but there was a faint light coming through. Not bright, just enough to notice. I stood up, careful not to make noise. The hum didn't change, didn't react. I stepped closer to the window. The light outside wasn't coming from the street. It was too steady, too uniform. I lifted the edge of the blinds slightly. There was nothing there. No car, no street light. But the light was still present, like it wasn't coming from a source I could see. I let the blind fall back. The hum continued. I turned back toward the bed. That's when I noticed something else. The phone cable. Even though I'd unplugged it, it was still warm. I picked it up again, warmer than it should have been without power. That didn't make sense. The hum shifted slightly, not louder, just different. I felt it more in my ears than heard it, like pressure building. I sat back down on the bed. Didn't know what else to do. The room felt wrong, not in a dramatic way, just subtly off, like everything was slightly out of sync. I checked the clock, 3:03 a.m. I remember that clearly. I kept looking at it. The seconds were ticking normally. The hum continued. The light behind the blinds stayed the same. I don't know how long I sat there, a few minutes, maybe longer. Then, without warning, everything stopped. The hum cut out. The light disappeared. The fan kicked back on. The lamp flickered once, then stayed off. I checked the clock again, 3:04. Only a minute had passed. That didn't feel right at all. I stayed awake after that, didn't sleep, just sat there until morning. When the sun came up, everything looked normal again. I checked the cable. Cold, no sign of damage. I checked the phone. Once I plugged it into a different charger, it powered on after a minute. Battery at 0 again. I went through the settings, same as before. No unusual activity, no apps running overnight, just a complete drain. I stopped charging my phone overnight after that. Started plugging it in during the day instead. Nothing happened for a while, about a week, maybe more. Then one afternoon, I noticed something. I'd left my phone charging on my desk. Went into the kitchen for a bit. When I came back, the screen was black. Dead again. The cable was warm, same as before. But this time, the lamp in my room hadn't turned off. The fan hadn't stopped. Everything else was normal, except the phone. I picked it up, and for a second, just before the screen came back on, I felt that same pressure in my ears. Faint. Like it was just about to start again. Then it was gone. I noticed it because I kept losing it. I was lying on the bonnet of my car out on this gravel pull-off near the moors, about 20 minutes outside town. It's one of those spots people use for dog walking during the day, but at night it's completely empty. No streetlights, no houses nearby, just open sky. It was cold, clear, no clouds at all. Perfect for stargazing. I'd gone out there a few times before with my friend Callum, but that night it was just me. I'd brought a blanket, a flask of coffee, and I was just lying there, letting my eyes adjust. After a while, you start to see more stars than you expect. The sky kind of fills in. I was just scanning across, picking out constellations I half recognized, when I noticed one star that didn't behave quite right. At first, I thought it was just my eyes. You know when you stare at something too long and it kind of drifts or flickers? It felt like that. But this one was different. Every time I moved my gaze slightly, it didn't move with the rest of the stars. It lagged, just a fraction of a second behind. I tested it a few times, thinking maybe I was imagining it. I'd look at a point slightly to the left, then quickly back to the star. Every other star shifted instantly with my vision. That one didn't. It sort of caught up, like it had to reappear in the right place. It was subtle. If I wasn't paying attention, I would have missed it. I sat up a bit, resting on my elbows, and focused on it properly. It wasn't brighter than the others. No color difference. Just a normal-looking star, except for that delay. I moved my head side to side, slowly. Same thing. Everything else stayed locked in place, but that one had this slight hesitation, like it wasn't part of the same sky. I remember saying out loud, "That's weird," even though no one was there. I took a sip of coffee and kept watching. After a minute or so, I noticed something else. It wasn't just lagging, it was drifting. Not across the sky like a satellite, just tiny movements, barely noticeable. But when I fixed my eyes on it, it didn't stay exactly where I expected. It kind of adjusted, like it was correcting itself. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was just tired, looked away for a bit, then back again. Still there, still off. I checked my phone to see if there were any satellites passing overhead. There's an app for that where Luft shows you what's moving. Nothing matched its position. I even checked for planes. Nothing. The sky was completely still, except for that one point. I lay back down, trying to relax and just observe it without overthinking. That's when I noticed the silence. It had crept in slowly, so I didn't catch it at first. Usually out there, you hear something. Wind, distant cars, maybe an owl. There was nothing. Not even the faint rustle of grass. I sat up again, listening. The world felt muted. Not totally silent, but like someone had turned the volume down. I looked around. The moor stretched out the same as always. Dark, flat, empty. My car was the only thing there. I checked the time. 11:41 p.m. I remember that because I checked it again later. I looked back at the star. It was still there. Still lagging. I decided to try something else. I got off the bonnet and stood up, walking a few steps away from the car. The gravel crunched under my shoes, but even that sounded duller than it should have. I looked back up. The star was in the same part of the sky, but now it seemed slightly brighter. Not by much, just enough that I noticed. I took another step. The brightness didn't change. I stopped moving, and that's when it shifted. Not drifting this time, a small, sudden movement, like it jumped slightly to the side. I blinked. It was back where it had been. I told myself it was my eyes again. Has to be. I walked back to the car and leaned against it, keeping my eyes on the sky. I didn't want to look away anymore. The longer I stared at it, the more that lag stood out. Every time I blinked, it felt like it took longer to come back into focus than everything else, like it had to reconnect. After a while, I started feeling uneasy. Not scared exactly, just that feeling you get when something's wrong but you can't explain why. I checked the time again. 11:41, same as before. That didn't make sense. I was sure at least 10 minutes had passed. I tapped my phone screen. The seconds ticked forward normally. 11:42. I stared at that for a second, then looked back up. The star was gone. I scanned the sky, trying to find it again. Everything looked normal. Every star in place. No lag, no drifting, just a regular sky. I stayed there for a while, trying to convince myself I'd just lost track of which one it was. But I knew roughly where it had been, and there was nothing there now. I packed up not long after that. Didn't feel like staying. As I got into the car, I had this weird sensation like I was being watched. Not from the ground, from above. I looked up one last time before getting in. Still nothing, just stars. I drove home. The whole drive felt off. The road seemed quieter than usual. Even the engine sounded different, like it was slightly out of sync with itself. I kept checking the time. It moved forward, but not in a way that felt consistent. I got home at 12:18. That didn't line up with when I'd left. It should have been earlier. I didn't think too hard about it. Just went inside, locked the door, tried to sleep. The next night, I went back. I told myself I wanted to prove it was nothing. Same spot, same setup, clear sky again. I lay on the bonnet, scanning the stars. It took a while, but I found it. Same position, same slight lag, like it had been waiting. I stared at it longer this time, didn't move as much, just kept my eyes fixed. After a minute or two, the lag stopped. It held steady like every other star. Perfectly in sync. That should have made me feel better. But it didn't, because then it started getting brighter, slowly. Not enough to stand out immediately, but enough that after a few seconds, I couldn't ignore it. I sat up, watching it. The brightness increased just a little, then stopped. And in that moment, I had this strange thought that it wasn't getting brighter. It was getting closer. I stood up without thinking. The air felt heavy again. That same muted silence from before. I looked around quickly. Nothing on the ground. Nothing moving. When I looked back up, the star was gone again. Just like before. No fading, no movement, just gone. I didn't stay after that. Got in the car, drove straight home. I haven't been back since. But sometimes when I'm outside at night, I catch myself scanning the sky. And every now and then there's a star that takes just a fraction too long to settle into place when I look at it. And I don't stare at it anymore. I saw it the first time just past a place called Wharton Cross, where the road narrows and cuts between two long stretches of farmland. It was late, around 9:30, that kind of early winter evening where it's already pitch black, but not that late yet. I was driving back from my sister's place. She lives out near a village called Bramley End. so it's a good 40-minute drive through nothing but fields, hedges, and the occasional farmhouse. No streetlights out there. Just your headlights and whatever you catch in them. I remember the road was damp, not raining anymore, but still wet enough that everything reflected slightly. No wind either. The trees along the roadside were completely still. I was maybe 10 minutes into the drive when I noticed the light. It wasn't bright. That's the first thing that stood out. If it had been brighter, I probably would have thought it was a plane or a drone straight away. But this was dim, almost like someone holding a covered torch. It was hovering just above a line of trees off to my right, not high in the sky, just above the treetops. At first, I thought it was something fixed, like a light on a pole or maybe a farmhouse further back that I couldn't see properly. But as I kept driving, I realized it wasn't staying in one place. It was moving. Not toward me, not away. Sideways, sliding along the tree line, smoothly. That's the part that stuck with me. It wasn't jittery like a drone or bobbing like something handheld. It was just gliding, perfectly level, like it was on a track. I slowed down a bit without really thinking about it, kept my eyes on it. The light stayed the same brightness, same size, no flicker, just moving. Then it stopped, dead still, right above a gap in the trees where a field opened up. I remember thinking, okay, maybe it's someone out there, a farmer, maybe, but it didn't make sense. Who's out in a pitch black field holding a steady light like that? And why would it be above the trees? I kept driving, getting closer to where it was, and then it moved again, this time faster. Not a sudden jump, just a quicker slide. It went left, then stopped again. Then gone. No fade, no drop. Just not there anymore. I actually slowed down almost to a crawl at that point, staring at where it had been. Nothing. Just trees. I pulled over a bit further down the road onto one of those muddy laybys, turned off the engine, got out of the car. It was quiet. Really quiet. No wind, no distant traffic, nothing. I stood there for a minute, just looking back toward the trees. No light, no movement. I even walked a few steps closer to the edge of the road, trying to get a better angle. Still nothing. After a while, I got back in the car and drove home. Didn't think much more about it that night. Told myself it was probably just someone with a drone or some weird reflection I didn't understand. But then I saw it again. 3 nights later, same road, same time, roughly. I wasn't expecting it, which is probably why it caught me off guard again. This time it was further ahead, maybe a few hundred meters down the road. Same kind of light, same height, just above the trees. I slowed down immediately. Heart rate picked up a bit, not panic, just that feeling like something's about to happen. The light wasn't moving at first, just hovering. Then it started sliding again. Left to right this time, same smooth motion, no sound. I rolled down my window a bit, nothing. No hum, no buzzing, nothing mechanical at all, just silence. As I got closer, I noticed something else. The light wasn't casting anything, no beam, no reflection on the trees below it. It was just there, like it existed on its own without affecting anything around it. That didn't sit right. I slowed almost to a stop again, and just like before, it stopped moving, hovered for a second, then vanished. Same way. Instant. I didn't get out of the car that time, just kept driving. But I kept checking my mirrors. Nothing behind me, nothing above. The rest of the drive felt normal. I got home, tried to forget about it, but I couldn't shake it. So the next evening, I decided to go back out there on purpose. Earlier this time, around 8:45. I parked in the same lay-by where I'd stopped before, left the engine off, sat there, waiting. It was colder that night, clear sky, no clouds. You could see the stars properly. I sat there for maybe 15 minutes. Nothing happened. I started to feel a bit stupid, honestly. Like I'd built it up in my head. I was just about to start the car and leave when I saw it again. Same place, same height, just above the trees. It was already there this time, not moving, just hovering. I didn't get out of the car, just sat there watching it through the windshield. After a few seconds, it started to move, slow at first, sliding sideways along the tree line. I kept my eyes locked on it. Didn't want to lose it. Then I noticed something else. The trees underneath it weren't moving, not even slightly. I mean, they shouldn't have been anyway. There wasn't any wind. But something about it looked wrong. Like the light and the trees weren't part of the same scene. I know that sounds weird, but that's the only way I can describe it. I cracked the window again. Still no sound. The light kept moving. Then it stopped. And this time, instead of disappearing straight away, it dipped. Just slightly. Like it lowered a bit toward the trees. Not much, maybe a few feet. Then it held there. That's when I felt it. That same quiet from before, but stronger. Like the air itself had gone still in a way that didn't feel natural. I looked around quickly. The fields were just empty, dark space. No movement anywhere. When I looked back at the light, it was gone again. I didn't wait around after that. Started the car, drove off. But something felt off on the drive back. The road looked the same, but I didn't recognize parts of it the way I should have. Like I'd driven that stretch enough times to know the bends, the trees, the dips. But for a few minutes, it felt unfamiliar. I checked the time when I got home. 10:00. That didn't make sense. I'd only been out there for maybe 20 minutes. It should have been earlier. I went back once more after that, a week later, same time, same place. Nothing, no light, no movement, just empty fields and trees. But now, whenever I drive that road at night, I find myself looking at that same stretch of trees. And sometimes, just for a second, I think I see something sitting just above them. Not bright, not moving, just there long enough to make me look twice. I only checked the footage because of the dog. Milo doesn't bark at much. He's old, slow, barely reacts to anything anymore. So when he started pacing around the living room at 2 in the morning, nails clicking on the floor, it woke me up straight away. At first, I thought he needed to go out. I got up, half asleep, opened the back door, but he didn't move. Just stood there, staring past me into the garden. Tail stiff, ears up. That wasn't normal for him. I stepped outside for a second, just to check. Cold night, bit of frost on the grass, quiet, no wind, no movement, nothing out of place. I didn't see anything. I came back in, shut the door, and Milo followed me, but he didn't settle down. Just kept pacing, occasionally stopping and looking toward the kitchen window. I tried to ignore it and went back to bed. Didn't sleep properly after that. In the morning, I remembered I had the camera set up in the back garden, just a basic security cam, nothing fancy. I mostly used it to keep an eye on deliveries or if Milo was outside. I figured I'd check it, just in case something had spooked him. I opened the app while I was having coffee, scrolled back to around 2 a.m. The footage looked normal at first. Empty garden, fence, shed, a couple of bins near the side. Same as always. I watched it at normal speed. Nothing. Then I noticed the timestamp. It jumped. Just a few seconds from 2:22:27. I thought maybe it was just a glitch in the recording, so I rewound it, played it again, slower this time. That's when I saw it. Right before the timestamp skipped, the image warped. Warped. That's the only way I can describe it. It wasn't like static or a drop in quality. The whole frame seemed to bend, like someone had pressed into the middle of the image from the outside. The fence lines curved slightly. The shed door stretched. Even the ground looked like it dipped for a split second. Then it snapped back, and the timestamp jumped. I paused the video, replayed it. Same thing every time. The distortion lasted maybe half a second, if that, but it was noticeable. I leaned closer to the screen, trying to see if there was anything else. That's when I noticed something near the edge of the frame. By the fence, it was hard to make out, just a darker patch against the shadow. But it hadn't been there before the distortion, and after it, it was gone. I scrubbed back and forth a few times. Before the warp, nothing. After, nothing. But during that split second, something was there. Not moving, just present. I sat there for a bit trying to figure out what I was looking at. I even checked older footage to compare. Nothing like that anywhere else. No glitches, no warping, just normal video. I told myself it was probably the camera bugging out. Maybe temperature affecting it. But that didn't explain the shape or the timestamp skipping. Later that day, I went outside to check the garden. Everything looked normal, fence intact, no marks on the ground, nothing disturbed. I even checked near where the shape had been. Nothing. That should have been the end of it. But that night, Milo started acting strange again. Same time, just after 2, pacing, stopping, looking toward the garden. I didn't get up straight away this time. Just lay there, listening. Then I heard something. Faint. From outside. Not a noise exactly, more like a low vibration, barely audible. I sat up. Milo froze in the doorway, staring toward the kitchen again. I got up slowly, trying not to make noise. Walked into the kitchen. Didn't turn on the light, just stood there. The sound, or whatever it was, stopped. Completely. Like it had been cut off. I waited for a few seconds. Nothing. I looked out the window. The garden was dark, same as always. I didn't see anything. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep much. In the morning, I checked the footage again. Same time, same camera. There was another skip. So 5 seconds missing. I slowed it down again, watched carefully. This time, the distortion was slightly different. Not centered, off to one side. The image bent toward the fence, like something was pulling at it from that direction. And again, in that split second, there was something there. Closer to the camera this time. Still hard to define, not a clear shape, just something that didn't belong. I paused it, zoomed in. The quality wasn't great, so it blurred out quickly, but I could see enough to know it wasn't just shadow. It had edges. Not sharp, but distinct. Then it was gone. I checked the rest of the footage. Nothing after that. Just empty garden. I went outside again, looked at the same spot. Still nothing. That afternoon, I called my friend Darren. He knows a bit about cameras, works in IT. I sent him the clip. He watched it a few times, then called me back. Said he'd never seen anything like that. Not a typical glitch, especially not with the timestamp skipping like that. He asked if I'd edited it. I told him no. He didn't really have an explanation, just said maybe the camera's faulty. But he didn't sound convinced. That night, I stayed up. Didn't want to miss it again. I sat in the living room with the lights off, watching the back door. Milo stayed close to me, quieter than usual. Time moved slow. 1:30, 1:45, 2. At 2:13, I started paying more attention. Just watching, listening. And then Milo stood up, stiff, looking toward the garden, same as before. I didn't move. A few seconds later, I felt it. Not heard. Felt that same low vibration, like something humming just below hearing. I held my breath. The room felt heavy, hard to explain, like the air was thicker. I glanced toward the window. For a second, I thought I saw something shift outside. Not a shape, just a change, like the darkness itself moved. Then, everything went quiet again. The feeling disappeared. Milo relaxed slightly, but didn't lie down. I stayed there for a while longer. Didn't see anything else. In the morning, I checked the footage. Another skip. We think it to 24. 5 seconds gone. I watched it over and over. The distortion was stronger this time. The entire frame warped in like something pressing through from the other side. From the other side. And for a fraction of a second, it filled more of the frame. Closer. Larger. Still not clear. But definitely there. Then it snapped back. Normal. Empty garden. I haven't seen anything directly myself. Not clearly. But every time I check that footage, those few seconds are missing. And every time, there's something in the frame that isn't there before or after. I still keep the camera running. And now, whenever it hits around 2:13, I find myself watching the timestamp more than the video. I first noticed it because it stopped just short of my shoes. I was lying on my back, half awake, just staring at the ceiling like you do when you're not fully asleep, but not really thinking either. It was early morning, still dark outside, that quiet time where nothing's moving yet. My alarm wasn't due for another hour. There was this faint line of light moving across the wall to my left. At first, I thought it was a car passing by. Happens all the time. Headlights through the blinds, slow sweep across the room. But this didn't look like that. It was too straight, too clean. It looked like a thin band, maybe a few inches wide, stretching from one side of the wall to the other. And it was moving slowly downward, like something scanning. I didn't move. I just watched it. It passed over a picture frame, and the glass caught it for a second, reflected it across the ceiling in a sharp line. That's when I realized it wasn't coming through the window the way headlights usually do. The angle was wrong. It kept moving down, not fast, not slow either, just steady. And then it stopped, right above the floor, just above where my shoes were by the wall. It stayed there for maybe 2 seconds. Then it faded out. Not like it moved away, it just dimmed until it was gone. I lay there for a bit, waiting for it to happen again. Nothing. I checked my phone. 5:12 a.m. I almost got up to look outside, but I didn't want to fully wake myself up before work. I told myself it was probably just some weird reflection. Maybe a car turning somewhere down the street. I went back to sleep. The next morning, I forgot about it until it happened again. Again. Same time, almost exactly. I woke up without knowing why, rolled slightly onto my side, and there it was again. That band of light, higher up on the wall this time, moving down. Same motion, same speed. I pushed myself up on one elbow and watched it more closely. It didn't flicker or shake like headlights. It was completely smooth. When it reached the same spot near the floor, it paused again, then disappeared. I sat there for a few seconds, listening. No cars, no sound at all. I got out of bed that time and went to the window. Street was empty. No movement, no headlights, nothing turning corners. Just a couple parked cars and the same streetlight that's always been there. I even looked at the houses opposite. No one had lights on. I went back to bed, but I didn't really sleep after that. Later that day, I mentioned it to my neighbor, Mark, while we were both out front. He shrugged it off, said it was probably a delivery van or something passing early. I told him the angle didn't make sense, and he just laughed and said I was overthinking it. I tried to leave it at that, but it kept happening. Not every morning, but enough that I started waking up just before it. I don't know how to explain that part. It wasn't like I set an alarm. I just opened my eyes, checked the time, 5:10, 5:11, and then a minute later, the light would appear. Always the same wall, always moving down, always stopping before the floor. I started paying more attention to the room. One morning, I noticed something else. The air looked off. Not in a big way, just near the light. As it moved, there was this faint shimmer around it, like heat rising off a road in summer. Subtle, but it was there. And it wasn't anywhere else in the room. I reached out toward it once. Didn't touch it exactly, just held my hand in the path. The light passed over my fingers. I expected to feel something. Warmth, maybe, nothing. But for a second, I couldn't see my hand properly, like it blurred out while the light was on it. Then it was gone. That's when I started feeling uneasy about it. I checked outside again that morning, but this time I stayed by the window longer. Nothing. No cars went by, no lights shifted. Everything outside stayed completely still. The next time it happened, I decided to test something. I moved my shoes. They'd been in the same spot every time, right where the light stopped. So I kicked them further into the room before going to sleep. When I woke up and saw the light again, I watched closely as it moved down the wall. It didn't stop where it used to. It kept going, all the way to the floor this time. Then it faded out like before. I sat up straight at that point, because the only thing that had changed was where the shoes were. The next morning, I moved something else. A chair. Pulled it slightly away from the wall. Same result. The light went all the way down again. No pause. It felt like it had been stopping at something before. That idea stuck with me more than I liked. I started leaving the room exactly the same every night. Same layout, same things against the wall, and sure enough, when everything was in its usual place, the light stopped early again, right above the floor, right where the shoes were. It didn't make sense. A few days after that, something else happened. I woke up, like usual, just before it started. But this time, it didn't appear on the wall. It was on the ceiling. Same kind of band, same steady movement, but it was sliding across the ceiling toward me. I froze. It moved slowly, inching closer until it reached directly above the bed. Then it stopped. I could see the shimmer more clearly up there, like the air itself was being disturbed. The light didn't fade right away this time. It stayed, and while it was there, I noticed a sound. Very faint, like a low hum, but not mechanical. More like pressure in your ears when you're going up a hill. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then the light vanished. The sound stopped with it. I didn't go back to sleep after that. That morning, I checked the time again. 5:12. Same as the first day I noticed it. I started keeping track after that, writing down when it happened, what I saw, anything different. There was a pattern, but I couldn't fully pin it down. Some mornings it didn't show up at all. Other mornings it appeared twice. Once on the wall, once on the ceiling. Always that same slow movement. Always that same stop. Then one morning, it did something different. It didn't move at all. I woke up and it was already there, low on the wall just above the floor, not moving, just sitting there. I watched it for maybe 10 seconds before I even realized what was off. It wasn't sweeping. It was fixed. The shimmer was stronger too, like the air was bending more than before. I sat up slowly. The moment I did, the light shifted. Not smoothly like before, just a quick adjustment like it snapped slightly to the side. Then it started moving again, downward. Except there was nowhere left to go. It reached the floor and stayed there, for longer than usual. Then it faded. I got up right after and checked everything. The wall, the floor, the window. Nothing looked different. But when I looked at my shoes, something felt off. I couldn't place it at first. Then I realized they were slightly turned. Not moved far, just angled differently than how I'd left them. I hadn't touched them since the night before. I started closing my door after that. Didn't change anything. The light still came, still moved the same way, still stopped in the same place. I even tried sleeping in the living room one night. Nothing happened, no light. Next night, back in the bedroom, it was there again. Same time, same movement. I stopped trying to explain it. I just started watching it, counting seconds, noting where it stopped, trying to see if it reacted to anything else. It never did, except once. A few weeks after it started, I woke up later than usual. The room was already dim with early morning light. And there it was, but it wasn't on the wall. It was across the bed, a thin band of light stretching over the blanket right across where my legs were. It wasn't moving, just sitting there. I didn't move, didn't even breathe properly. After a few seconds, it started to slide, slowly, up the bed, toward my chest. I stayed completely still. It passed over my legs. Same thing as before, no feeling, but that strange blur, like my body wasn't quite visible while it was there. When it reached my stomach, it stopped, held there, then moved again, up to my chest, and stopped. The hum came back, stronger this time. Not loud, but I could feel it more than hear it. Then, just like every other time, it disappeared. I sat there for a long time after that, eventually got up, went to work, did everything like normal. That was 3 weeks ago, it hasn't happened since. But I still wake up around 5:10 most mornings, just lying there, waiting to see if the wall lights up again. I noticed it because my shadow stopped matching me. I was about 5 minutes from home, walking down the long road that runs past the old playing fields. It was late, around 10:30. Not that late, but late enough that the street was empty. A couple of cars parked along the curb, no one outside. The streetlights along that stretch are spaced out more than usual, so you walk in and out of light as you go. I just stepped into one of the lit patches when I saw it. My shadow stretched out ahead of me like normal, but it looked wrong, sharper than it should have been, edges too clean, like someone had taken the blur out of it completely. I slowed down a bit, watching it as I walked. It stayed like that, crisp, darker too, not just a faint shape, solid. I stopped walking. The shadow stopped, still sharp, still darker than it should have been. I lifted my hand slightly. The shadow followed, but there was a delay. Just a fraction of a second. I moved my hand again, quicker this time. Same thing, a slight lag, like it was catching up. I stood there, staring at it, trying to figure out what I was seeing. The streetlight above me looked normal. No flicker, no change in brightness. I stepped forward, out of the light. My shadow should have softened, but for a second, it didn't. It stayed sharp, even in the darker part of the street. Then it snapped back to normal. Faint, blurry. I turned around, looking back at the streetlight. Everything looked fine. I told myself it was just the angle, or maybe my eyes adjusting. I kept walking, but I was paying attention now, watching the ground more than anything else. The next light came up ahead. I stepped into it slowly. My shadow formed again, normal at first. Then it sharpened, same as before. Dark, defined, too clean. I stopped again, heart rate picking up slightly. I didn't like it. I shifted my weight. The shadow lagged again, just that tiny delay. Then corrected itself. I looked up. The streetlight above me was still steady, no change. I looked around, empty street, no cars moving, no one watching. Then I noticed something else. The air felt off, not colder, just still, like the space around me had tightened slightly. I stood there, not moving. The shadow didn't change, just stayed sharp. I lifted my foot slowly, set it down. The shadow followed, just a beat behind. I swallowed, trying to keep calm. This didn't make sense. I stepped forward again. The moment I moved out of the light, the shadow returned to normal. Faint, soft. I turned back and stepped into the light again. It sharpened, immediately, like a switch. I stayed there for a second, testing it. In the light, sharp. Out of the light, normal. But that didn't explain the delay or the darkness or why it felt like it wasn't quite attached to me. I looked up again, and that's when I saw it, a dim light above, not directly over the streetlight, higher, faint, almost blending into the sky. If I hadn't been looking for something, I wouldn't have noticed it. It wasn't bright, just a soft glow, drifting, slowly. I stepped back out of the light, eyes fixed upward. My shadow faded back to normal behind me. The glow above moved slightly, not fast, just enough to notice. It didn't flicker, didn't blink, just held that same dull brightness. I felt a pressure in my ears then, subtle, like when you change elevation quickly. I swallowed. The pressure stayed. I looked back down at the ground. My shadow was normal again. I stepped forward into the light. It sharpened instantly. I looked up again. The glow had shifted, slightly closer, still faint, still hard to focus on. I stood there trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to leave. Just keep walking. Ignore it. But I stayed, watching. The glow dimmed slightly, then brightened again. Not a pulse, more like a slow adjustment. I felt the pressure in my ears increase slightly. My shadow grew darker, even sharper. It looked thicker, like it had depth. I moved my arm. The shadow followed. Still that slight delay. I lowered my arm again. The shadow corrected itself. I stepped back. Out of the light, the shadow softened. The pressure eased. I looked up. The glow was fading, slowly, not moving away, just becoming less visible, until it was gone. The sky looked normal again, just dark. I stood there for a few seconds, waiting. Nothing. The street felt normal again. Distant sounds came back, a car somewhere far off, a door closing. I looked down. My shadow looked like it should. Faint, slightly blurred. I walked home after that. Didn't stop again. Didn't look back. When I got inside, I checked the time. 10:47. That didn't seem right. It should have been earlier. I stood in the hallway for a bit, just thinking. Then I went to bed. The next night, I walked the same route, same time. Everything normal. Streetlights the same, no strange shadows, no glow above. But now every time I step under a light, I glance down first, just to make sure my shadow moves when I do. I noticed it because the light came from the wrong place. I'd woken up early without an alarm, which isn't normal for me. It was one of those mornings where your eyes just open and you're awake straight away. I checked my phone, 5:18 a.m., still dark outside. I lay there for a minute, then got up and went to the kitchen. My place backs onto open fields, so the window over the sink gives a clear view out toward the horizon. I remember thinking it should have been starting to get light soon. I made a cup of coffee and stood by the window, just looking out. The sky was flat and dark, a few clouds scattered low, nothing unusual. Then the light appeared. Not across the horizon, not spreading out the way sunrise does. It was vertical, a narrow band of pale light rising straight up from the ground, somewhere out in the fields. At first, I thought it was a reflection in the glass, something inside the kitchen catching the window at a weird angle. So I moved slightly to the side. The band stayed in the same place outside. I stepped closer to the window. It didn't look like light hitting something. It looked like the sky itself was brighter in that one strip, like someone had cut a clean line upward and filled it with early morning light. Everything else around it stayed dark. I stood there, coffee in my hand, trying to make sense of it. The band didn't widen, didn't spread. It just held steady, perfectly vertical. I checked the time again, 5:20. I looked back up. The light was still there, unchanged. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hand on the counter. The fields were dark, no buildings out there, no towers, nothing that could be casting something like that. The band reached high into the sky, faded slightly near the top, but still clearly defined. I stepped away from the window and walked into the living room. There's another window there that faces the same direction, but at a slightly different angle. I looked out through that one. The band was still visible. Same position, same shape. That ruled out it being something on the glass. I went back into the kitchen. The light hadn't moved. I started to feel that quiet unease then. Not fear, just confusion that didn't have anywhere to settle. I opened the back door and stepped outside. Cold air hit me straight away. The ground was damp, probably from overnight dew. I walked a few steps out onto the grass. The light looked the same from outside, maybe clearer. The edges were sharp, too sharp, not like natural light spreading through atmosphere, just a clean boundary. I stood there, listening. No wind, no birds, nothing. just silence. I looked up along the length of the band. It seemed to stretch higher than it should have. Like it wasn't just part of the sky, more like something cutting through it. I took another step forward. The light didn't change, didn't react, just stayed there. I checked my phone again, 5:21. I remember thinking it should have started spreading by now. That's how sunrise works. It creeps in, fills the horizon, softens everything. This wasn't doing that. It was just there. Then it shifted. Not sideways, not downward, up. The bottom of the band began to retract, slowly at first, the light pulling upward like it was being drawn back into the sky. The fields below it stayed dark. I watched it, not moving. The vertical strip shortened, the bottom edge rising higher and higher. It didn't flicker, didn't change brightness, just reduced in length. I took a step back without realizing. The air felt heavier, like the space around me had tightened. The light continued to retract. Now it was only halfway up, then higher, until it was just a narrow segment suspended above the horizon. Then it disappeared, not fading, not dimming, just gone. The sky went back to normal, dark, with the first real signs of dawn starting to show along the horizon. I stood there for a few seconds staring at where it had been. Nothing. Just the usual gradual light now. Birds started making noise again, faint at first, then more. I walked back inside, set the cup down on the counter. My hands felt colder than they should have. I checked the time, 5:23. That didn't seem right. It had felt longer. I stayed in the kitchen, watching the sky as it brightened properly this time. Normal sunrise. Soft light spreading across the horizon, everything how it should be. Later that day, I walked out into the fields, followed the direction where I'd seen the band. There was nothing out there. No structures, no marks, just open ground. I stood there for a bit, trying to line up where it had been. Couldn't find anything. That evening, I mentioned it to my neighbor Claire. She just shook her head, said she hadn't seen anything. I didn't push it. But the next morning, I woke up early again. Around the same time, stood in the kitchen, watched the horizon, everything normal. No vertical light, just the slow, even spread of dawn. But now, every morning when I wake up before sunrise, I check that same spot, just to see if the sky does it again. I was about 40 minutes into the drive when it happened. Middle of nowhere, just that long stretch of road between Hexham and Kielder where you don't see another car for ages. It had been raining earlier, not heavy, just enough to leave the road slick and reflective. By the time I was out there, it had mostly stopped, just the occasional drop hitting the windshield. I remember because I had the wipers off, and I hate that squeaky, half-dry wipe sound. I was doing maybe 50, not in a rush. No music on, just the engine and that low hum you get when you're driving at night too long. My headlights were cutting straight down the road, picking up the edges of the trees and the white lines. Then for a second, literally a second, I thought it had started raining again. Except it didn't look right. The drops in the headlights, they weren't falling down, they were going up. It was like the air in front of the car filled with these thin streaks, like rain, but every single one of them was rising. Fast, too. Like gravity was flipped just in that one patch. I blinked, and it was gone. Just empty road again. Dry. I actually slowed down a bit after that, because I thought maybe I'd zoned out or something. Like my eyes had adjusted weird, or I'd hit a weird patch of mist. I even leaned forward a bit, trying to see if there was something in the air I'd missed. Nothing. I told myself it was just tiredness. I'd been up since early morning, long day, that kind of thing. But then I started noticing other stuff. Not right away. It kind of crept in. The first thing was the sound. It took me a minute to realize what was off about it. The car sounded duller, like someone had turned down the volume on everything. The engine, the tires on the road, it was all still there, just muted. At first I thought maybe I'd gone onto a different kind of asphalt, but when I looked at the road, it hadn't changed. I cracked the window a bit. No wind. That was weird on its own. I was moving, not slow either, but there was no air pushing in. It just felt still, like the air outside wasn't reacting to the car at all. I closed the window again. I kept driving. Then I noticed the trees. They weren't moving. There wasn't much wind that night anyway. But even then, you usually see something. A bit of sway, leaves flickering in the headlights. These just stood there, completely still, like cutouts. I remember thinking, this is stupid. Just drive. don't overthink it. But I started gripping the wheel tighter without realizing it. A few minutes later, I saw it again. Same thing. The rain. This time, it was off to the right side of the road. My headlights caught it just at the edge, thin lines shooting upward, like the ground was pulling them in reverse. I turned my head to look properly. Gone. The second my eyes landed on it, it stopped. That was the first time I felt that weird drop in my stomach. Not panic, just something wasn't lining up. I checked the time on the dashboard, 11:18 p.m. I remember that clearly because I kept checking it after. I drove on, a bit slower now, maybe 40. That's when the radio cut in. I hadn't had it on at all. I always drive in silence at night, but suddenly there was this low crackle, like static trying to tune itself. I didn't touch anything. It flickered on for maybe 2 seconds. No music, just this faint hiss and a kind of pulsing tone underneath it. Then it cut back out. I stared at the console for a second, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. I told myself it was electrical. Old car, wet weather, something like that. Still didn't feel right. A couple minutes after that, I noticed something ahead. At first, I thought it was another car, way in the distance, just a faint light above the road, but it wasn't in the right place. It was too high, and it wasn't moving. I kept driving toward it, trying to figure out what it was. A reflection, maybe? Something on a hill? But as I got closer, it didn't change size the way it should have. It just stayed there, a small, steady glow, hanging above the road, not bright, more like a dull white, almost gray. I slowed down more, maybe 30 now. The air still felt wrong, quiet, like everything was padded. Then my headlights hit that rain again. This time it filled the whole road, upward streaks all around like I was driving into a reverse downpour. I instinctively flinched like I was about to hit something, and then nothing. Clear again. But something else changed. The light ahead was gone. Just gone. I checked the time again. 11:18 p.m. Same as before. I frowned at that, because I knew more than a few minutes had passed. At least 5, maybe 10. I tapped the dashboard like that would fix it. The seconds ticked over normally. 11:19. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Then I noticed the road. I didn't recognize it. Same type of road, same trees, but not the same stretch. I'd driven that route enough times to know the bends, the landmarks. There should have been a turnoff to the left by then. A little sign, barely visible. It wasn't there. I kept driving, trying to tell myself I'd just lost track of distance. That's when I saw something on the side of the road. At first I thought it was a person. Tall shape, just at the edge of the trees. My headlights only caught part of it. I slowed down even more, trying to get a better look. It didn't move. It wasn't facing me. At least I don't think it was. It was just there. Upright, still. As I got closer, the shape didn't get clearer. That was the weird part. Usually things come into focus under headlights. You start to see details. This didn't. It stayed kind of flat, like a shadow that didn't match the lighting. I didn't stop. No chance. I kept my eyes forward, but I could see it in the edge of my vision as I passed. And right as it slipped out of view, the radio crackled again. Same hiss, same low tone, louder this time. I glanced down for half a second. When I looked back up, something was in the road. I hit the brakes. Hard. The car skidded slightly on the wet surface, but stopped. There was nothing there, just empty road. But I knew I'd seen something. Not a shape exactly. More like the air had shifted. Like heat haze, but thicker. It had been right in front of the car. I sat there for a few seconds, hands tight on the wheel, heart going faster than I liked. The radio was still making that noise. Then it cut out again. Silence. I looked at the time. 11:32 p.m. That didn't make sense either. I'd only been stopped for a few seconds. I didn't want to sit there any longer. I drove, didn't care about speed anymore. I just kept going until I saw something familiar. Eventually, I did. A sign, then a bend I recognized. Everything started to feel normal again. The sound of the engine came back properly. The trees moved slightly in the wind. The air felt like air again. By the time I got home, it was 12:07. I checked the route later. There's no missing section like that, no long stretch where you can lose 20 minutes without noticing. And I went back the next day. Same road, same time more or less. Nothing. No lights, no shapes, no weird silence, just a normal drive. But twice since then, I've seen it again. That upward rain, always just for a second, and always when there's no wind. I didn't think much of it at first because of how casual he said it. I was taking the bins out early just before work, and my neighbor, Paul, was already out on his driveway messing with his car. He nodded at me like usual, then said, "You had something over your house last night." I laughed a bit, thinking he meant a helicopter or something. "What do you mean?" He didn't laugh back. "Light. Just sitting there, late, around 2 maybe." That made me pause. "What kind of light?" He shrugged. "Hard to say. Not bright like a floodlight, just there. Didn't move much, then it was gone." I stood there for a second, trying to place it. I hadn't noticed anything. "I didn't hear anything," I said. "Yeah," he replied, already turning back to his car. "That's what I thought was weird." That was it. He didn't push it, just left it there like it was nothing. I took the bins out, went to work, didn't really think about it until later that afternoon. That's when I remembered the camera. I've got one mounted above the back door facing the garden. Nothing fancy, just something I installed after a couple of break-ins happened nearby. It records continuously and stores the last few days. So when I got home, I pulled up the footage on my phone, scrolled back to around 2 a.m. At first, everything looked normal. Empty garden, fence, shed, same as always. Then I noticed the timestamp. It jumped from 2:23. 5 seconds missing. I frowned, scrubbed back, played it again. Same thing. Right before the skip, there was a flash. Not bright. Not like a camera flash or lightning. More like the entire image lightened slightly, just for a split second. Then it cut ahead. I slowed the playback down. Watched frame by frame. The flash wasn't uniform. It wasn't coming from a single direction. It was like the whole frame lifted in brightness, but unevenly. The fence looked slightly washed out. The grass lost some detail, then jump. 5 seconds gone. After that, everything returned to normal. I replayed it a few times, same result. I checked other parts of the footage, nothing like it anywhere else. No other skips, no other flashes, just that one moment. I went outside and looked around. Nothing unusual, no marks on the ground, no signs of anything. I even checked the roof line, just in case. Everything looked normal. That night, I paid more attention. Stayed up a bit later, sat in the living room with the lights off, occasionally glancing out the back window. Nothing happened. No lights, no sounds. I went to bed around midnight. Slept normally. Woke up around 6, no interruptions. The next morning I checked the footage again. Scrolled through the night. Everything looked fine. No skips, no flashes. I started to think maybe it was just a glitch, camera lagging or something. Then 2 nights later it happened again. I didn't hear anything, didn't wake up. But when I checked the footage the next morning, there was another skip. This time from 0:56 to 2:14:01. Same 5 seconds. Same kind of flash right before it. I watched it over and over, trying to catch something, anything. But there was nothing in those frames, just that brief lift in brightness. Then the jump. I mentioned it to Paul that evening. He nodded like he expected it. "Yeah, I saw it again," he said. "When?" "Same time, just hovering there, bit lower this time." That didn't sit right. "What do you mean lower?" He pointed roughly above my house, closer to the roof, still quiet, just there. "Did it move?" "Not really. Then it sort of faded." I didn't know what to say to that. It didn't match what I was seeing on the footage. There was no hovering light, just a flash, and missing time. That night, I stayed up later. Set my phone to record from inside, pointed toward the back window. Not expecting much, but I wanted something. I kept checking the time, 1:30, 1:50, 2:05. I started feeling tired around 2:10, eyes getting heavy. I stood up, stretched, walked into the kitchen to get some water. When I came back, the room felt off, not different in a big way, just quieter. I checked the time, 2:16. That didn't make sense. I was sure it had only been a couple minutes. I looked at my phone. The recording was still running. I stopped it and played it back. Everything looked normal at first. Me sitting there, getting up, walking out of frame. Then a flash, same as before, brief, subtle. And then the timestamp jumped. 5 seconds missing. When the footage resumed, I was already back in the room. Sitting down, I stared at it. I didn't remember coming back in that quickly, or sitting down like that. It didn't match what I remembered doing. I replayed it again. Same thing. Flash, skip, me already back. I felt that unease settle in properly then, not panic. Just something wasn't right. I went to the window, looked out into the garden. Nothing. Just darkness. I stood there for a while, listening. No sound, no movement. The air felt still. I went back to the couch, but I didn't sit, just stood there, watching the room. Nothing else happened. The next morning, I checked the outside camera again. Another skip. T7, same pattern, same flash. I haven't seen the light myself. Not directly. But Paul still mentions it sometimes. Says it's there every few nights, just hovering, quiet, watching the house. And every time he says that, I think about those missing 5 seconds. I noticed the compass before anything else. It was one of those small ones clipped onto the strap of my bag. Nothing fancy, just something I kept out of habit more than necessity. The trail was well marked, and I'd walked that ridge before. It was early evening, maybe just after 6. Late autumn, cold but not freezing. The sky had that flat gray look like it couldn't decide whether to clear up or rain. I'd set off a couple hours earlier, planning to loop back before dark. The ridge itself is pretty exposed. Long stretch of uneven ground, low grass, scattered rock, and a steep drop on one side. You can see for miles when the weather's clear. That day, visibility wasn't great. Not foggy, but hazy enough that everything in the distance looked slightly washed out. I was walking along, not really thinking about anything, when I glanced down at the compass. The needle was moving, slowly. Not spinning, just drifting. I stopped walking, watched it. It didn't snap back like it should, just kept sliding, steady and smooth, like something was pulling it. I turned slightly, thinking maybe I'd moved in a way that affected it. No change. The needle kept drifting. Then it stopped. Pointing somewhere that wasn't north. I checked the direction against the landscape. It was off, by a noticeable amount. I tapped it lightly with my finger. Nothing. The needle didn't react, just stayed fixed. That didn't make sense. I unclipped it, held it flat in my palm. Still wrong. I spun around slowly, watching it. No matter which way I turned, it didn't correct itself. It just held that same position. That's when I felt something was off. Not fear. Just a quiet kind of unease. I looked up. The ridge stretched out ahead the same as always. Nothing unusual. No one else around. No sound except the faint movement of wind through the grass. I put the compass back and kept walking. Told myself it was probably broken. Cheap thing, probably just worn out. But after a few steps, I felt off. Like my sense of direction wasn't lining up with what I was seeing. I stopped again, turned around. The path behind me looked normal. But for a second, I had this strange feeling that it wasn't the same direction I'd come from. I shook that off quickly, just kept moving. A few minutes later, I checked the compass again. Still wrong. Same direction. Didn't budge. I started paying more attention to everything then. The ground, the sky, trying to orient myself without relying on it. That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. The wind had dropped completely. The grass wasn't moving. No distant sounds. Nothing. Just stillness. I slowed down, looked around more carefully. That's when I saw the glow. It was far off, near the horizon, low, just above the line where the ridge dropped away. At first I thought it was a reflection or maybe someone with a light in the distance. But it didn't look right. Too soft, too contained. It wasn't bright, just a faint pale glow, and it didn't spread, didn't light anything around it. It just sat there. I stopped walking completely, stared at it. It didn't move, didn't flicker, just held steady. Then it pulsed. Once. Not brighter exactly, just sharper, like it snapped into focus for a split second. Then it went back to how it was. I stood there watching, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. The glow stayed faint, unchanging. I checked the compass again, still pointing in that wrong direction. I looked from the compass to the glow. Something about the angle didn't sit right, like they were connected somehow. I took a step forward. The ground felt uneven under my foot, even though it looked flat. I steadied myself, looked up again. The glow hadn't moved, but it felt closer. I don't know how else to explain it. It looked the same distance, but felt nearer. I stopped again, didn't want to keep walking toward it. The silence around me felt heavier now, like the air had thickened. I could hear my own breathing more clearly than anything else. I turned around, decided to head back. Didn't want to stay out there any longer. As I started walking the other way, I felt something strange. The sense of direction didn't feel right. Like the path behind me wasn't leading back the way I thought it should. I checked landmarks, rocks, the slope of the ridge. Everything looked familiar. but slightly off. I kept walking. Faster now. After a minute or two, I glanced back over my shoulder. The glow was still there. Same spot, same faint light. It hadn't followed, but it hadn't faded either. I turned forward again, focused on the path. The wind still hadn't returned, no sound, just my footsteps. I checked the compass one more time. Still wrong, unchanged. Then, without warning, the needle snapped. Quick, sharp movement. Back to north, exactly where it should be. I stopped walking, looked up, the glow was gone. No fade, no movement, just not there anymore. The wind came back a second later, not strong, just enough to move the grass again. Normal sound returned, distant, faint. I stood there for a few seconds, letting everything settle. The ridge looked the same, nothing out of place. I checked the compass again, perfectly normal. I started walking back. This time, everything felt right again. The path made sense. The direction felt solid. I got back to the trailhead just as it was getting dark. Checked the time. 7:05. That didn't match what I expected. It should have been earlier. I stood there by the car for a minute just thinking. Then I got in and drove home. I haven't used that compass since, but sometimes when I'm out walking, I catch myself glancing at where that glow had been, half expecting to see it again. I heard it before I noticed anything else. I was about halfway through my usual loop, just walking the long path that cuts behind the housing estate and runs along the edge of the fields. It was late, maybe just after 11. Warm night, no wind, that kind of still air where sound carries further than it should. At first, I thought it was someone's alarm going off in the distance. A faint tone rising and falling, not loud, just enough to catch your attention. I stopped walking and listened. It wasn't coming from any direction I could pin down. Not from the houses, not from the road behind me. It felt like it was above me somehow, but when I looked up, there was nothing there. Just a clear sky, a few stars, no planes, no clouds. The sound dipped lower, then rose again. Slow, steady, like a sine wave, if that makes sense. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds before I started walking again. Figured it was just something carrying weird through the air. Happened sometimes at night, but as I kept going, the sound didn't fade. It stayed with me. Not louder, not quieter. Just there. Like it was keeping pace. That's when it started to feel off. I slowed down a bit and listened again. The tone shifted slightly, climbing higher, then dropping back down. No rhythm I could follow exactly, but it wasn't random either. I looked up again, still nothing. I even turned in a full circle, trying to figure out if it got louder in any direction. It didn't. That's when I pulled my phone out, thinking maybe I could record it. I opened the voice recorder, held it up, waited a few seconds. I could hear it clearly with my own ears, but when I played it back, there was nothing. Just the faint sound of my footsteps and some distant traffic. I tried again, same result. I put my phone away and kept walking. The path bends slightly to the right, about 100 meters ahead, where it dips down a bit closer to the fields. There's no streetlights there, just darkness on either side. As I got closer to that part, the tone changed. It got tighter, I guess. The rise and fall became sharper, more noticeable. I stopped again, right at the edge of the bend, and for the first time I felt it as well as heard it. Not in a dramatic way, just a faint pressure in my ears, like when you go up a hill too fast. I swallowed, trying to clear it. Didn't help. The sound dipped low, almost out of hearing range, then climbed higher than before. I looked straight up. Nothing. But I had this weird sense that if I focused hard enough, I'd see something. Like it was just out of reach. I stood there longer than I should have. The longer I stayed still, the more noticeable the sound became. Not louder, just clearer, like my brain was tuning into it. I started feeling uneasy at that point. Not scared, just that quiet kind of discomfort where things don't line up. So I kept moving. As I rounded the bend, the path opened up a bit. Fields on both sides, no fences, just long grass stretching out into darkness. That's when I noticed the lights. Not in the sky, on the ground. Small points of light scattered across the field to my left. Faint, like reflections or something catching the moonlight. Except there wasn't much moon. I slowed down again, staring out into the field. The lights didn't move. They just sat there, spaced out unevenly, and the tone, it seemed to match them somehow. Every time the pitch rose, the lights got slightly brighter. When it dropped, they dimmed. It wasn't dramatic. You had to really pay attention to see it. But once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. I stepped off the path slightly onto the grass. The moment I did, the tone shifted, sharper, higher. The pressure in my ears increased just a bit. I stopped. The lights in the field flickered, not blinking, just a quick, uneven change. I took a step back onto the path. The tone dropped again. The lights steadied. I stood there, trying to process that. It felt like the sound and the lights were reacting to where I was. I didn't like that. I stayed on the path and kept walking, faster now. The tone followed, always above, always out of sight. As I got further along, I noticed something else. My footsteps sounded wrong, not louder or quieter, but just slightly delayed, like there was a fraction of a second between my foot hitting the ground and the sound reaching me. I tested it by stomping harder. Same thing, that tiny delay. I stopped completely. The tone kept going. I clapped my hands once, the sound came back just slightly late. That was enough for me. I turned around, decided I'd just head back the way I came. As soon as I did, the tone changed again. Lower this time, and slower, like it was stretching out. I walked faster, didn't run, but close to it. The lights in the field stayed where they were, but I had this feeling they were watching, not in a literal sense. Just that same sense you get when you know something's focused on you. Halfway back to the houses, the tone started to fade. Not all at once, just gradually dropping out. The pressure in my ears eased. My footsteps sounded normal again. I slowed down, turned around one last time. The field was dark, no lights, no sound, just the path and the distant glow of streetlights. I stood there for a bit, listening. Nothing. I walked home after that, locked the door, didn't go back out. The next day I went back during daylight. Same path, same field. There's nothing out there. No markers, no equipment, nothing that would reflect light like that. Just grass. I even stepped off the path again, stood roughly where I had the night before. Nothing happened. No sound, no lights. Everything felt normal. But now, whenever I'm out late, I catch myself listening for that tone. Sometimes I think I hear the start of it, just faint enough that I can't be sure. And I always look up when I do, even though I know I won't see anything. I felt it before I saw anything. Just a faint vibration through the steering wheel, like the engine was idling rough. But the engine wasn't on. I'd pulled over in one of those small gravel laybys just off a country road. It was late, around midnight, maybe a bit after. I'd been driving back from visiting my cousin, long day, and I needed a break before finishing the last stretch home. So I parked, turned the engine off, and just sat there for a minute. That's when the vibration started. At first, I thought maybe I'd left the engine running without realizing. I glanced down. Keys weren't even in the ignition. Everything was off. But the wheel still had that faint tremor in it. Not strong, just enough to notice when you rested your hands on it. I took my hands off. It stopped. Or maybe I just couldn't feel it anymore. I put my hands back. There it was again, a low, steady vibration, like something distant was resonating through the car. I frowned, leaned back in the seat, listening. The car itself was silent. No ticking engine, no wind outside, nothing. Just that feeling through the wheel. I told myself it was probably something external. Maybe a heavy vehicle passing somewhere far off, sending vibrations through the ground. But there hadn't been a single car on that road for at least 10 minutes. I glanced in the rearview mirror without really thinking. And that's when I saw it. A faint light, hovering, not directly behind me, slightly off to one side above the road. It wasn't bright, just a soft, dull glow. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. I froze for a second, eyes fixed on the mirror. The light didn't move, didn't flicker, just sat there. I turned my head slowly, trying to look out the rear window directly. Nothing. Just darkness. I looked back at the mirror. The light was still there. Same position, same faint glow. That didn't make sense. I leaned forward slightly, adjusting my angle, still visible in the mirror, but not through the window. I shifted in my seat, trying to line it up. Every time I tried to look at it directly, it wasn't there. Only in the mirror. That's when I noticed the vibration again. Stronger now. Not much, but enough that I could feel it even without holding the wheel. A subtle hum through the seat, through the floor. I put my hand back on the steering wheel. The vibration matched. Steady. Low. I swallowed, trying to keep calm. Probably something simple. Some kind of reflection, maybe from behind the trees or a distant building. even though there weren't any buildings out there. I kept my eyes on the mirror. The light shifted slightly, not moving across the road, just adjusting its position, like it had changed angle. I held my breath. The vibration deepened. Not louder, just more noticeable, like it was pressing against something. I glanced down at the dashboard. Everything was off. No lights, no movement. I looked back up. The light in the mirror seemed closer. Still faint, still soft, but larger. I turned again, trying to see it directly. Nothing. Just the empty road behind me. I felt that drop in my stomach then, that quiet realization that something wasn't lining up. I reached for the keys, thinking I'd just start the car and leave. But I hesitated, because the vibration changed. It pulsed once. Just a slight shift, then steadied again. I looked back at the mirror. The light dimmed, not fading completely, just less visible, like it was pulling away. Then, for a split second, it brightened, sharper, more defined, and I thought I could see an edge. Not a shape exactly, just a curved line within the glow. Then it was gone. No movement, no fade, just gone. The mirror reflected nothing but darkness again. The vibration stopped at the same time, completely, like it had never been there. I sat there for a few seconds, staring at the mirror, waiting for it to come back. Nothing. I turned around one more time, looking directly out the back. Empty road, no lights, no sound. I started the engine. The car came to life normally, no issues. I pulled back onto the road and drove the rest of the way home without stopping. Everything felt normal again. No vibration, no strange lights, just the usual drive. When I got home, I sat in the car for a minute before going inside. Checked the rearview mirror again. Nothing. Just my own reflection. I went inside, locked the door, tried to sleep. Didn't sleep much. The next day I checked the car. No problems. No signs of anything unusual. I even drove back out to that same lay-by later that week. Parked in the same spot. Sat there for a while. Nothing happened. But now, every time I stop somewhere at night, I find myself checking the mirror more than I should, just in case that faint light shows up again. I noticed it when I shifted my feet. I was standing near the middle of the boat, just adjusting my stance because the floor had started to feel colder through my boots. It was one of those quiet nights out on the reservoir. No wind, water like glass. You could hear every small movement. The creak of the boat, the line tapping against the rod. I'd been out there for maybe an hour already. No bites, but I didn't mind. I go out more for the quiet than anything. My name's Aaron, by the way. I usually fish alone, especially at night. Less hassle, no one talking. Anyway, I looked down when I shifted my feet, and that's when I saw it. A faint glow under the boat. Not bright, just enough to notice against the dark water. At first, I thought it was my headlamp, reflecting somehow. I had it around my neck, not switched on, but sometimes it catches light weirdly. So I turned it on and pointed it down. The glow didn't change. Still there. Soft, kind of white, but not really. More like a pale gray light, if that makes sense. I leaned over the side, trying to see better. The water was clear enough that night, but I couldn't make out anything beneath it. Just that glow, sitting under the boat. I straightened up and turned the lamp off again. The glow stayed. I told myself it was probably something in the water, maybe algae or some kind of reflection from the sky, even though there wasn't much moon. I picked up my rod again, tried to ignore it, but every few seconds I found myself looking down. It wasn't moving, just staying right under me. After a minute or two, I realized something else. The boat was drifting. Slowly, but it was moving. I could tell from the shoreline, the way the trees were shifting slightly in relation to me. But the glow, it stayed centered, right beneath the middle of the boat. I tested it. I stepped toward the front. The glow moved with me. Not instantly, just slightly delayed, like it had to catch up. I froze for a second, then stepped back. Same thing. It followed. That's when it stopped feeling like something natural. I grabbed my phone, thinking I'd record it. The screen lit up, reflected faintly on the water. But when I pointed the camera down, I couldn't see the glow properly, just darkness and a bit of reflection from the phone itself. I lowered the phone, looked with my eyes, still there. I tried again. Nothing on the camera. That made me uneasy. I put the phone away and just stood there, watching. The glow didn't pulse or flicker. It was steady, and the longer I looked, the more it felt like it wasn't lighting the water. It was just existing in it, like it didn't interact with anything around it. I crouched down, bringing my face closer to the surface. The air felt colder near the water. I could hear a faint sound then, not from above, from below. A low, dull hum, barely there. I held my breath, trying to focus on it. It wasn't constant. It sort of came and went, like it was rising and falling slowly. I straightened up again, suddenly aware of how alone I was out there. No other boats, no lights on the shore nearby. Just me. And that glow. I reached for the oar and pushed against the water, trying to move the boat more deliberately. It slid sideways. The shoreline shifted faster this time, but the glow stayed with me. Still centered, still under the boat. That's when I noticed the temperature change. Not around me, in the water. Where the glow was, the surface looked slightly disturbed, not rippling, just different, like it was thicker somehow. I don't know how else to describe it. I leaned over again, watching closely. The glow seemed to deepen slightly, not brighter, just more defined, like it was coming from further below. The hum got stronger for a second, then faded again. I pulled back, suddenly not wanting to be that close to it. I sat down on the bench, keeping my eyes on the water, trying to think of something normal that could explain it. Nothing came to mind. I checked the time on my phone, 11:26 p.m. I remember that clearly because I checked it again later. I decided I'd just leave, pack up, head back to shore. I reeled in my line, hands moving slower than usual. Every now and then I'd glance down. Still there, still following. I picked up the oar again and started rowing properly this time. The boat moved forward, cutting through the water. The glow stayed with me, perfectly centered. It didn't lag this time, just stayed exactly under the boat no matter how I moved. That made it worse, because now it felt like it was tracking me. Not reacting, tracking. I rowed faster. The hum returned. Stronger now. Still low, but more noticeable. I could feel it faintly in my feet through the floor of the boat. I looked down again. The glow had changed slightly, not in brightness, in shape. It wasn't just a soft circle anymore. There was something uneven about it, like parts of it were shifting within the light, not moving exactly, just rearranging. I stopped rowing for a second. The boat drifted. The glow stayed. The hum steadied. I felt that same heaviness in the air I've felt a few times since, like everything was slightly out of sync. I didn't stay still for long. I started rowing again, harder this time. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I just wanted to get back to shore. The glow didn't fade, didn't change. It stayed with me the entire way, all the way until I was close enough to see the outline of the dock. That's when it shifted. Not suddenly, just moved slightly deeper, like it was sinking. The hum dropped with it, lower, fainter. I kept rowing, didn't slow down. As the boat scraped lightly against the edge of the dock, the glow dimmed, not fading out, just pulling away, like it was retreating into the water. I didn't wait to see more. I grabbed my gear, stepped onto the dock, looked back once. The water was dark again, nothing there, no glow, no movement, just the reflection of the sky. I checked the time when I got to the car, 11:49. That didn't feel right. It should have taken longer to get back. I sat there for a minute, engine off, just listening. Everything sounded normal again. No hum, no pressure. I haven't been back out there at night since, but a couple of weeks later, I was there during the day. Same spot, same part of the water. And when I looked over the side, just for a second, I thought I saw something pale shift beneath the surface, right where the boat would have been. I noticed it because the fire stopped making noise. Not went out, just stopped sounding like a fire. I was sitting there on this cheap folding chair, half wrapped in a sleeping bag, watching the flames and not really thinking about anything. It was late, maybe just past midnight. I'd hiked out earlier that day and set up in this small clearing about a mile off the trail. My name's Lewis. I don't camp a lot, but I'd gone out there to clear my head after a rough week. No signal, no other people, just trees. There had been a steady breeze all evening. Nothing strong, just enough to keep the leaves moving and the fire flickering. Then it stopped, not gradually, just cut off. The leaves froze in place. The flames dropped lower, like they'd lost something. And the sound, the constant crackling and shifting, just disappeared. The fire was still burning. I could see it, but it wasn't making noise. I remember leaning forward trying to listen harder, like maybe my ears had popped or something. Nothing. No wind, no insects, no distant sounds at all. It felt like someone had muted everything. I stood up slowly, scanning the trees around me. They weren't moving, not even slightly. The air felt wrong, thicker somehow. I took a few steps away from the fire, boots pressing into the dirt louder than they should have been. That's when I noticed the smell, or lack of it. The fire should have smelled strong, especially that close. But I couldn't smell anything. No smoke, no burning wood, just nothing. I turned back toward the fire, crouched down, held my hand near it. I could feel the heat. So it was real. Everything was real, just disconnected. I straightened up again, and that's when I saw it. Not clearly, just movement, out in the trees, maybe 20 or 30 meters away. At first, I thought the wind had picked back up. The branches shifted slightly, but it wasn't like wind. It was more like a ripple, like something invisible was moving through them, pushing them aside in a smooth, steady motion. It started on my left, a faint disturbance in the leaves, then it moved across the tree line. Not fast, not slow, just steady, like a wave. I stood there, not moving, watching it. The trees didn't react the way they should have. They didn't sway or rustle. They just parted slightly as it passed, then returned to stillness. The ripple moved closer. I could see it better now. Not a shape, more like a distortion, like the air itself was bending. It reminded me of heat haze, but thicker, more defined, and it was coming toward the clearing. I took a step back without thinking. My foot scraped the ground. I didn't hear it. I felt it, but there was no sound. That's when my chest tightened a bit. Not panic, just that realization that something wasn't right. The ripple reached the edge of the clearing. The trees there shifted slightly, then stilled again. The distortion entered the open space, and I could see it properly. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a person, but not shaped like one, just a vertical stretch of warped air moving forward. I held my breath. It kept moving, straight across the clearing, toward me. The firelight passed through it oddly, not bending like you'd expect, more like it dimmed slightly where it crossed. I took another step back. Still no sound. The world felt completely cut off. The ripple stopped, right at the edge of the firelight, maybe 10 feet away from me. It stayed there, not moving. The air around it seemed to shift slightly, like it was adjusting. I didn't know what to do. Running didn't feel like an option. Standing there didn't feel much better. I glanced down at my watch. The screen was blank. It should have been lit. I tapped it. Nothing. I looked back up. The distortion was still there, but it had changed slightly. Not moved. Just narrowed, like it was focusing. I felt that same pressure in my ears then. Low, dull, building slowly. I swallowed, trying to clear it. Didn't help. The ripple moved again, closer, into the firelight. And for a second, I thought I could see something inside it, not clearly, just a suggestion of shape, like something was there but not fully visible. It shifted slightly, then stopped again. I didn't move, didn't even breathe properly. The pressure in my ears peaked. Then everything snapped back. The wind returned. All at once, leaves rustling, fire crackling, the normal sounds rushing in like they'd been waiting. The distortion vanished completely. Nothing left, just the clearing, the trees, the fire. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to process it. My watch flickered back on, 12:17. I checked it again a minute later, 12:18. That didn't make sense. It felt like longer had passed. I looked around the clearing. Everything looked normal, but something felt off. I walked over to where the ripple had stopped. The ground looked the same, no marks, no disturbance, but the air felt colder there, just slightly. I stayed up the rest of the night. Didn't sit down again, just stood near the fire watching the trees. Nothing else happened. At first light, I packed up. Didn't take my time. Just got everything together and headed back to the trail. As I was leaving the clearing, I turned around once. The trees were moving normally in the breeze. Everything looked exactly how it should have. But for a second, just at the edge of the tree line, I thought I saw that same ripple again. Faint, barely there, moving away. Then it was gone. I saw it for less than a second, but it stuck in a way normal things don't. I was driving back from a late job out near the edge of the peaks, somewhere past Glossop, where the roads get narrow and there's nothing but hills and dry stone walls. It was just after 1 a.m., clear sky, no clouds, cold enough that the air felt sharp when I'd stepped out earlier. The road was empty, no other cars for miles. I had the radio on low, just for background noise. and my headlights were cutting across the bends as I went. There's this stretch where the road climbs slightly and then dips, and on one side it opens up into a wide, dark slope with nothing on it. No trees, just grass and rock. As I came up over that rise, my headlights angled upward for a second, and that's when I caught it. Something high above. Not directly overhead, more off to the right, maybe above the hillside. A curved surface, metallic. It reflected the headlights just enough to show shape, but not detail. Smooth, like part of something larger, but I couldn't see the edges. It looked wrong. Too clean, too uniform. I remember thinking, what is that? And in the same moment, it moved, not drifting, not gliding. It shifted, instantly, like it had been one place and then it wasn't. The reflection disappeared. The sky went back to normal. Stars, nothing else. I slowed down without thinking, foot easing off the accelerator. I checked the mirrors. Nothing behind me. I looked back up through the windshield. Nothing. Just empty sky. I told myself it was probably something I'd misjudged. A plane, maybe, but it hadn't looked like a plane. No lights, no blinking, and it hadn't moved like one. I kept driving, but I was more alert now, scanning the sky every few seconds, half expecting to see it again. Nothing. The road curved again, dropping down this time with the hillside rising up on my right. I drove another minute or so trying to shake it off. Then the radio crackled. Not loudly, just a brief burst of static. I glanced at it. The station didn't change. The music cut out for maybe a second, then came back. I turned it off. Didn't feel like listening anymore. The silence in the car felt different after that. Heavier. I drove a bit slower, eyes flicking between the road and the sky. About 5 minutes later, I reached another open stretch. This one flatter, with fields on both sides. That's when I saw something again. Not the same thing exactly, but something off. A patch of darkness in the sky that didn't match the rest. At first, I thought it was just a cloud, but there weren't any clouds. The stars around it were clear. But within that patch, nothing. Like a piece of the sky had been removed. I squinted, trying to focus on it. As I did, it shifted, not moving across the sky, just adjusting, like it had noticed where I was looking. Then it was gone. The stars filled back in. I felt that drop in my stomach then, the kind you get when something doesn't make sense. I kept driving. Didn't slow this time. Just wanted to get off that stretch of road. The next part runs between higher walls, less open sky. I felt a bit better there, more contained, less exposed. But then I noticed something else. The headlights. They looked dimmer. Not a lot, just slightly. Like the beam wasn't reaching as far as it should. I checked the dashboard. Everything looked normal. No warning lights. I flicked the high beams on. They worked. But the light still felt muted. I drove another minute. Then the radio crackled again, even though it was off. A faint burst of static. I looked at it. The display stayed dark. But I heard it. Just for a second. Then silence again. I didn't like that. I sped up slightly. The road straightened out, more open land ahead. I glanced up again, and that's when I saw it properly. Not a reflection this time, a shape high above, still, large, not defined clearly, but there, like a darker outline against the sky. I slowed down again, couldn't help it. My eyes locked onto it, and the moment I did, it shifted, instantly, like before. No movement between positions, just one place, then another, further away, higher, and then gone, completely. No fade, no sound, just empty sky again. I sat there for a second, hands tight on the wheel. Then I kept driving. Didn't stop. Didn't look back. The rest of the drive was normal. Headlights returned to normal. No more static. Nothing else unusual. I got home around 1:40. Parked the car. Sat there for a minute before getting out. Just listening. Everything felt normal again. I went inside, locked the door, tried to sleep. Didn't sleep much. The next day, I checked the car. Headlights were fine. Radio was fine. No issues. I even drove the same route during the day. Nothing unusual. Just hills and sky. But now, whenever I drive at night, especially on open roads, I catch myself checking the sky more than I should. And sometimes, just for a split second, I think I see something curved up there, just before it isn't there anymore. It started as something I thought I'd imagined. I was in the kitchen, just standing by the counter waiting for the kettle to boil. Early evening, maybe around 6. It had been raining all day, that steady kind that doesn't let up, and the whole house felt damp and quiet. That's when I noticed the hum. At first, I assumed it was the fridge. Old house, old appliances, everything makes some kind of noise. But this wasn't the usual low buzz you tune out. It was deeper, not loud, just present, like it was sitting underneath everything else. I stood there for a few seconds, listening. The kettle clicked off, but the hum stayed. I turned my head toward the fridge, still there. I unplugged it. The hum didn't change. That's when I frowned a bit. I checked the extractor fan above the stove. Off. I even went over to the boiler cupboard and opened it. Silent, but the hum was still there. I stepped back into the kitchen and just stood in the middle of the room. It wasn't coming from any one direction. It felt like it was inside the walls, or maybe the floor. Hard to place. I told myself it was probably something outside, maybe a generator nearby or roadworks I couldn't hear properly through the rain. So I went to the back door and stepped outside. The moment I did, it stopped. Not faded, not quieter, just gone. I stood there in the rain for a second, listening. Nothing but the sound of water hitting the pavement and the fence. No hum. I stepped back inside. It came back instantly. Same pitch, same steady tone. That's when it started to bother me. I walked through the house room by room, trying to find where it was strongest. Living room, same level. Hallway, same. Upstairs, still there. It didn't get louder or quieter anywhere. Just constant. I even checked the fuse box, flipped a few switches to cut power to parts of the house. The lights went out. The hum stayed. That didn't make sense. I ended up just ignoring it for the rest of the evening. Put the TV on, turned the volume up a bit. You could still hear it underneath if you paid attention. That night, it got worse. I went to bed around 11. Rain had stopped by then, everything outside quiet again. I turned the lights off, lay down, and that's when I realized how noticeable the hum was without any other noise. It was stronger. Not louder exactly, just clearer. I could feel it in my ears, like a pressure. I rolled onto my side, then onto my back, trying to find a position where it wasn't as noticeable. Didn't help. It didn't change. I got up after a while, went to the window, opened it. Outside, nothing. Inside, still there. I stood there for a bit, half expecting it to stop again like before. It didn't. I went back to bed. Eventually I fell asleep, or I think I did, because the next thing I remember, I was awake again. The room felt darker than it should have been. And the hum, it had changed. It was lower now. Slower, like it was pulsing slightly. I sat up, looked at the clock. 2:08 a.m. I remember that clearly. The hum dipped, then rose again. I swung my legs out of bed and stood up. The floor felt colder than usual. I walked to the door, opened it. The sound didn't change. Still everywhere. I went downstairs. Each step felt louder than it should have been, like the hum was dampening everything else. When I reached the bottom, I paused. The living room looked normal, everything in place, but the air felt heavy. I stepped into the room. The hum deepened, not louder, just thicker. I turned slowly, trying to figure out if it was coming from a specific spot. It wasn't. It felt like it was centered around me. I moved toward the front door. The hum followed, same intensity, same tone. I reached for the handle, hesitated for a second, then opened it. The moment the door opened, silence. The hum vanished. Completely. I stepped outside, cold air hit me, no sound except distant dripping from gutters. I stood there, heart going a bit faster now. Then I stepped back inside. The hum returned, exactly as it was before. No delay, I shut the door, stood there, listened. It didn't fluctuate, didn't react, just stayed. I tried something then. I walked quickly back outside, then back in again. Same result, off, on, like crossing a boundary. That didn't sit right. I stayed up after that, didn't go back to bed. Just sat in the living room, watching nothing, listening to that low, steady tone. Around 3 a.m., it shifted again. The pulsing became more noticeable. Still subtle, but definite. I could feel it in my chest now, not just my ears. I stood up slowly. The room felt tighter, hard to explain, like the space itself had shrunk slightly. I took a step forward. The hum changed pitch, just slightly. I took another step. It shifted again. I stopped. The tone steadied. That's when I realized it was reacting, not randomly, to me. I stepped back. The pitch dropped. Forward. It rose again. I didn't like that at all. I moved toward the center of the room. The hum settled into a single steady note. I stood there, trying to keep my breathing calm. Then, for a second, everything distorted. Not visually, just the feeling, like the air around me compressed. The hum peaked, then stopped. Dead silence. I stood there waiting. Nothing. I looked at the clock. It's 3:17. I waited another minute. Still nothing. The house felt normal again. The pressure gone, The air lighter, I didn't move for a while, just stood there listening. Eventually, I went back upstairs, lay down. No hum, no sound. I must have fallen asleep. In the morning, everything was fine. No hum, no weird feeling, just a normal house. I went about my day, trying not to think about it too much. But now, every so often, usually when it's quiet, I think I hear the start of it again. Just faint, barely there, and when I step outside, it always disappears. I saw it just after the bend. I was driving home from a late shift, somewhere between 1:30 and 2 in the morning. The road cuts through this stretch of low farmland, nothing but hedges and open fields on both sides. No houses for a couple miles, no streetlights either. Just a narrow lane and whatever your headlights pick up. It had gotten foggy about 10 minutes into the drive. Not thick at first, just patches. But by the time I reached that part of the road, it had settled in properly. Low, dense, sitting right on the ground and creeping up across the tarmac. I slowed down a bit, not much, just enough to see further ahead. That's when I noticed the light. It was low. That's the first thing that stood out. Not in the sky, not at eye level. It was hovering maybe a foot or two above the road, just ahead of the bend. Soft white. Not bright like headlights, more like a dull glow. At first, I thought it was another car coming the other way, maybe angled weird through the fog. But it didn't move. It just sat there. I eased off the accelerator, keeping my eyes on it. The fog around it looked thinner somehow. Not gone, just less dense, like the light was clearing it slightly. I flicked my high beams on. The road ahead lit up more, but the glow didn't change. Still there, still steady. I remember leaning forward slightly, trying to get a better look. No shape around it, no vehicle. Just that small, hovering light. I slowed almost to a crawl. There was no sound, no engine, no wind, nothing outside. Just the car and that faint hum you get from the tires on damp road. The closer I got, the more I expected it to resolve into something normal. A bike light, a reflection, anything, but it didn't. It stayed the same size, same height, same soft glow. Then about maybe 20 meters away, the fog shifted. Not like wind, more like it parted. Right around the light, and in that moment, it was gone. Gone. No fade, no movement. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't. The fog filled back in like nothing had been there at all. I kept driving, slower now, eyes fixed on the spot where it had been. Nothing, just road. I passed the bend, checked both sides, no one there, no cars, no lights in the distance, nothing. I kept going for another minute or so, then pulled over. Didn't really know why, just felt like I needed to stop. I sat there with the engine running, looking back down the road. What? The fog had thickened again. Couldn't see as far now. I thought about getting out, but I didn't, just stayed in the car. After a bit, I turned around, slowly, drove back the way I came. The same stretch of road, the same bend, no light, no thinning of the fog, just empty. I told myself it was probably nothing, some kind of reflection through the fog, maybe from a distant car I couldn't see. That made sense at the time, enough to get me home. But then it happened again. 2 nights later, the same road, same time, more or less. Fog again, but heavier this time. I almost didn't take that route, but I didn't want to go the long way around. I was about to reach the same bend when I saw it, further ahead this time. Same kind of light, same height, just hovering above the road. I slowed immediately. Heart rate picked up a bit, not panic, just that feeling you get when you recognize something you shouldn't. I kept my headlights on low this time. Didn't want to wash it out. The fog around it was thinner again, not clear, just less dense, like it was pushing it back slightly. I kept driving, slow, careful, watching it. It didn't move, didn't flicker, just stayed there. I got closer, maybe 30 meters now, and that's when I noticed something else. The road looked wrong around it, not obviously, just slightly off, like the perspective didn't quite line up. I can't explain that properly, just that it didn't look like normal road anymore. I slowed even more, life barely moving, the light stayed fixed. Just like before, the fog shifted, thinned out in a small patch, and the light vanished. I stopped the car, right there in the road, sat there for a few seconds, staring ahead, nothing, just fog. I rolled down the window, cold air came in, no sound, no movement. I turned off the engine, silence. I could hear my own breathing, nothing else. I opened the door slightly, stepped 1 foot out, the gravel at the edge of the road crunched under my shoe. That sounded normal, too normal. I stood there for a second, looking ahead. Then I noticed something. The fog in front of me wasn't moving. Not at all. It just hung there, completely still. I stepped fully out of the car, closed the door quietly, walked a few steps forward. The fog parted slightly as I moved through it, but ahead, where the light had been, it looked thinner again. Not empty, just lighter. I took another step, then another, and that's when I felt it. A faint pressure in my ears, like going up a hill. I stopped. The pressure held, didn't increase, didn't fade, just stayed. I looked down at the road. It looked normal again, just wet tarmac. No marks, no signs of anything. I looked back up. The fog had thickened again. The thinner patch was gone. Everything looked the same. I turned around and went back to the car, got in, started the engine, drove home without stopping again. Stop. I didn't go that way for a while after that. Took the longer route, even if it added 20 minutes. But a couple weeks later, I had to go that way again. No fog that night. Clear sky, full visibility. I passed the same bend. Nothing there. Just empty road. But as I drove past, I noticed something on the ground. A faint patch, like the surface of the road was slightly discolored. Not a stain. Not a mark. Just different. It was right where the light had been the second time. I slowed down a bit, looked at it in the headlights, then I drove on. I didn't stop. I haven't stopped there since. But every time there's fog now, I find myself slowing down at that bend, just in case something's sitting there again. I woke up already sitting halfway upright. Not fully awake, not panicking, just alert, like my body had reacted to something before my brain caught up. The room was quiet, too quiet, in a way that felt different from normal nighttime quiet. I could hear my own breathing clearly, and the faint ticking from the radiator cooling down. I stayed still for a few seconds, just listening. That's when I got the feeling. Not a thought, not something I saw, just the sense that I hadn't been alone a moment ago, like something had just moved out of the space near the bed. I didn't move right away, just kept my eyes on the dark outline of the room. My name's Nathan, and I live alone in a small flat on the edge of town. Top floor, no one above me. That matters, because there's no way someone could have just been there without me hearing something. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up. 3:11 a.m. I remember that clearly. I used the light from the screen to scan the room. Wardrobe closed, door shut. Chair by the window empty. Nothing out of place, but something felt off. I couldn't tell what. I swung my legs out of bed slowly, feet touching the cold floor. Still no sound except my own movement. I stood up and checked the door first. Still locked. Chain on. Exactly how I left it. I opened it slightly anyway, looked out into the hallway. Empty. No movement. I closed it again. That should have been enough to settle it, but it wasn't. I turned back into the room, and that's when I noticed the window. The blinds. They were slightly open, not wide, just a narrow angle like someone had tilted them to let a small strip of light through, except there was no light outside. Just darkness. I stared at them for a few seconds because I was sure I'd closed them completely before going to bed. I always do. It's just habit. I walked over slowly, keeping my eyes on them. They didn't move. No breeze, no shift, just sitting there, slightly tilted. I reached out and touched them. Cold. Normal. I adjusted them, closed again. Turned back toward the room. Still felt that same unease. Like something had been there and I just missed it. I checked under the bed. Nothing. Opened the wardrobe. Empty. Looked behind the door. Nothing. Everything was exactly where it should be. I went back to bed, but I didn't lie down straight away. Just sat there, phone in hand, watching the room. The silence stayed. No footsteps, no creaks, nothing. After a while, I lay back down. Didn't turn the lights on, just stared at the ceiling. Eventually, I must have drifted off again. The next time I woke up, it was morning. Light coming through the blinds, they were open again, same angle as before. That's when I felt it properly. That uncomfortable drop in your stomach when something doesn't line up. I got up straight away, walked over, checked them. They weren't loose, they didn't slip or move on their own. You had to adjust them manually. I stood there for a bit, trying to think of any reason they'd be like that. Could have been me, half asleep. Maybe I'd gotten up and didn't remember, but I didn't remember getting out of bed at all. I went about my day trying to ignore it. Work, errands, normal stuff. But it stayed in the back of my mind. That feeling, that something had been in the room. That night, I made sure to check everything before going to sleep. Door locked, windows closed, blinds fully shut. I even took a photo of them on my phone, just to be sure. I went to bed around midnight, fell asleep quickly, and then, same thing. Woke up suddenly, already aware. Heart beating a bit faster this time, the room felt occupied, not visibly, just that same sense. I grabbed my phone, 311 again. Exactly, I didn't like that. I stayed still, eyes scanning the room. Nothing moved. No sound. I turned my head slowly toward the window. The blinds were open again, same angle, same narrow gap. I sat up immediately, didn't hesitate this time, got out of bed and walked over, closed them again, turned around, and for a second, I thought I saw something near the corner of the room. Not a shape exactly, more like the darkness shifted just slightly. Then it was gone. I stood there staring at that spot, nothing there. I switched the light on. The room looked normal, completely normal. I checked the time again, 3:12. I stayed up for a while after that, didn't go back to sleep, just sat on the bed watching, nothing else happened. In the morning, the blinds were closed, exactly how I left them. That should have been reassuring, but it wasn't, because it meant something had opened them before, not after. The next few nights, I didn't sleep properly. I'd wake up at random times, checking the room. Sometimes the blinds were still closed. Sometimes they were slightly open again. Always at that same angle. Always when I woke up suddenly. Never when I woke up normally. One night, I decided to stay awake, just to see. I sat in bed, lights off, watching the window. Time passed slowly. 1 a.m., 2 a.m., nothing. Around 3, I started feeling tired. My eyes kept drifting. I checked the time, 3:09. I blinked, looked back at the window. The blinds were still closed. I told myself I'd just rest my eyes for a second. Not sleep, just blink. I must have lost a few seconds. Because when I opened them again, the blinds were open, same angle. And the room felt wrong, like something had just left. I didn't see anything, didn't hear anything, but the air felt different, lighter, like whatever had been there wasn't anymore. I checked the time, 3:11. I got up slowly, walked over, closed the blinds, turned back, and for a moment, I felt that same presence again, behind me, close. I didn't turn around straight away, just stood there. Then I did. Nothing. Empty room. I haven't stayed awake through it since. Now I just go to sleep. And sometimes I wake up at 3:11 and then the blinds are already open. I noticed it because it stayed just out of reach. At first I thought it was coming from somewhere nearby. A generator maybe, or one of those electrical boxes you sometimes pass on quiet streets. It was that kind of sound. Low, steady, almost more felt than heard. I slowed down, trying to place it. It didn't get louder or quieter. Just stayed the same. I kept walking. The sound stayed ahead of me. I was on a footpath that runs along a canal outside Warrington. It's not busy at night, especially not midweek, just a straight stretch of gravel path, water on one side, trees on the other. It was just after 10 p.m., cold, dry, no wind. I had my hands in my pockets, head down, not really paying attention until that hum cut through. I stopped walking. The sound stopped too, not faded, stopped. I stood there listening, nothing, no hum, no movement, just the usual quiet. Distant traffic somewhere far off, water barely shifting against the edge. I took a step forward. The hum came back, same tone, same level. I frowned, took another step, still there, always just ahead of me. I sped up a bit. The sound didn't change, didn't get closer, didn't move further away, just stayed in front. I slowed again, same thing. I stopped completely. Silence. I stood there for a second trying to process it. All right, I said under my breath. I started walking again. The hum returned immediately. It wasn't loud, but it sat right at the edge of hearing, like it was coming from somewhere just beyond where I could focus. I picked up my pace, walking faster now. The gravel crunched under my shoes, louder than the sound itself. The hum didn't change, didn't get closer. I started to feel that tightness in my chest. I stopped again. Silence. I turned around slowly, nothing behind me. The path stretched back the way I'd come, empty. I turned forward again, took one step. The hum came back, same place, ahead. I exhaled slowly. Just keep going, I said. I walked faster, not running, but close. The hum stayed in front. I couldn't catch it. No matter how fast I moved, it didn't drift further away either, just stayed that exact distance, like it was fixed. I slowed down again. The sound stayed steady. My ears started to feel that pressure again, subtle but building. I rubbed one ear slightly, didn't help. I glanced to the side toward the canal. The water looked black, Flat. No reflection. That felt off too. Usually you get some shimmer, even at night. I looked back to the path. The hum continued. I took a few slower steps now. Testing it. The sound didn't react. Didn't change. Just stayed ahead. I stopped again. Silence. I stood there longer this time, trying to hear anything else. Nothing. I held my breath. Still nothing. I took a step. The hum came back. Instant. I felt a slight shift in the air, like something moving just out of view. I stepped forward again. The sound moved with me, or stayed ahead. I couldn't tell. I looked straight ahead, focusing on the path, trying to see something, anything. There was nothing. Just the narrow stretch of gravel disappearing into darkness. The trees on either side felt closer than they should have been, leaning in slightly. I picked up my pace again. This time faster, almost jogging. The hum stayed, same distance, same tone. I couldn't close the gap. I stopped suddenly. Silence. I bent slightly, hands on my knees, catching my breath. The pressure in my ears eased. I straightened up, looked ahead. The path looked normal again. I took one step. The hum returned. I shook my head. "This is stupid," I muttered, but my voice sounded off. Flat, like it didn't carry properly. I started walking again. Steady pace. The hum followed or stayed ahead. I couldn't tell anymore. After a few minutes, I noticed something else. The sound wasn't just in front of me. It was slightly above. Not high, just elevated. Like it was coming from a point just ahead and slightly above my eye level. I looked up. Nothing. Just dark sky between the tree branches. I looked back down. The hum stayed. I took another step and another. Then I saw something. Barely. A slight distortion. Right at the edge of where the path disappeared into darkness, like the air was bending slightly. I slowed. The distortion stayed ahead, same distance. I stopped. It stopped. I took a step. It moved or stayed ahead, always just out of reach. My chest felt tight again. I took a deeper breath. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. The hum grew just a fraction stronger, not louder, just more present. I stepped forward again. The distortion became slightly more noticeable. Still faint, still hard to focus on, but definitely there. I kept walking. The hum stayed. The distortion stayed, always just ahead. I didn't try to catch up anymore. I just kept moving. After a while, the path opened up slightly. The trees thinned, the canal widened, and the sound stopped. Completely. I froze. Looked ahead. The distortion was gone. The path looked normal. The air felt normal. The pressure in my ears faded. I stood there for a minute, listening. Nothing. Just the usual quiet. I walked forward slowly. No hum, no distortion, just the path. I kept going until I reached the next bridge. There were streetlights there. Real light. I stepped under one. Looked back the way I'd come. The path disappeared into darkness again. Nothing moved, nothing followed. I stood there for a while, then turned and walked home. I didn't hear the hum again. But for the rest of the walk, I had this constant feeling that if I sped up just a little more, I might finally catch whatever had been just ahead of me. I noticed it because it didn't sound like anything. At first, I thought it was a noise, some kind of low hum coming from somewhere in the house. But when I stopped and listened, there wasn't anything to hear. It was in my chest, a vibration, low, steady, almost like standing next to something heavy running in the background. Except there was no source for it. I stood in the kitchen, one hand on the counter, just trying to figure out where it was coming from. The fridge was on, but it sounded normal. The boiler wasn't running. Everything else was off. I held my breath. The vibration stayed, not louder, not quieter, just there. I pressed a hand lightly against my chest. I could feel it more clearly then, not my heartbeat, something else, slower, steadier. I frowned. All right. I walked into the hallway. The vibration followed, didn't change, didn't shift, just stayed exactly the same. I went into the living room. Same thing, no difference. I turned slowly in a circle, like that would help me pinpoint it. Nothing, no direction. It wasn't coming from anywhere. It was just inside me. I grabbed my phone from the table and checked the time. 11:52 p.m. Too late for anything nearby to be running loudly. I opened a window slightly. Cold air came in. No sound from outside, no distant traffic, no machinery, just quiet. The vibration didn't change. If anything, it felt more noticeable now. I swallowed, tried to focus on something else. It didn't help. It was like my body was picking up something I couldn't hear. I walked back into the kitchen, stood still again. Same. Constant. I felt that tightness in my chest building slightly. Not pain, just awareness. I leaned against the counter, trying to steady myself. "Maybe it's just you," I said quietly, but it didn't feel like that. It felt external, like something pressing in. I pushed myself upright and headed for the front door. I don't know why, just instinct. I opened it. The moment I stepped outside, it stopped. Completely. Like it had never been there. I froze on the doorstep, waited, nothing, no vibration, no pressure, just the normal quiet of the street, a faint breeze, distant sound of a car somewhere far off. I took a few steps onto the pavement. Still nothing. I stood there for a minute, breathing slowly, trying to understand. Then I stepped back inside. The vibration came back instantly, full, steady, exactly the same as before. I stopped just inside the doorway. My chest tightened again. I stepped back out. Gone. I stepped in. Back. Out. Gone. In. Back. I stared at the floor for a second. Okay. I stepped fully inside again and closed the door. The vibration settled back into place, unchanged. I walked slowly through the house, room to room. It didn't vary, didn't get stronger or weaker, just stayed constant. I went upstairs. Same thing. Every step I took, it followed or stayed. I couldn't tell. I stopped at the top of the stairs, listened. No sound, just that feeling. I went into the bedroom, stood in the middle of the room. Same. I checked the walls, put my hand against them. No vibration there, just in me. I went back downstairs, moved slower now, more aware. The house felt different, not visibly, just heavier. I walked to the back door, opened it, stepped outside, gone. Instant. I stood there longer this time, trying to feel anything. Nothing, just normal. I looked back into the house. Everything looked the same. Lights off, still. I stepped back inside. The vibration returned. I exhaled slowly. Then I noticed something else. It wasn't just in my chest. It was slightly higher now, closer to my throat. I swallowed. It stayed. I took a few steps forward. The feeling remained, constant, unchanging. I walked into the living room again. Stood still. The air felt dense, like it had weight to it. I looked around. Nothing had changed. Same furniture, same shadows. I turned slowly. That's when I noticed the curtain. It wasn't moving, even though the window behind it was slightly open. No breeze, no shift. I stepped closer. The fabric hung completely still. I reached out and touched it. Cool. Normal. I let it fall back into place. Still no movement. I stepped back. The vibration continued. I checked the time again, 11:58 p.m. Only a few minutes had passed. It felt longer. I stood there, trying to decide what to do. Then, without really thinking about it, I turned and walked straight back out the front door. The moment I crossed the threshold, it stopped. Again, completely. I stood on the pavement, looked back at the house. Everything looked normal. No lights, no movement. Just the same as always. I stayed outside for a few minutes. The sensation didn't return. I took a few more steps away from the house. Still nothing. Normal. I walked back toward the door slowly. Stopped just before stepping in, took a breath, then stepped inside. The vibration came back, but weaker this time. Still there, just less. I stood there, waiting. It didn't build back up, it stayed at that lower level. After a minute or two, it started to fade, slowly, until it was gone, completely. I stood there for a while, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. The house felt normal again, quiet, still. I walked through each room one more time. Nothing unusual, no change. I went back to the front door, opened it, stepped outside. Still nothing, normal. I closed it again, locked it. Went upstairs, lay down on the bed, stared at the ceiling. My chest felt normal, no vibration, no pressure, just my own breathing. After a while, I closed my eyes, but right before I fell asleep, I had this thought that whatever I'd felt hadn't been coming from inside me at all. It had been coming from the house. I noticed it before I even fully woke up. Something felt off about the way I was lying there. Not uncomfortable, just wrong. Like something in the room wasn't where it should be. I opened my eyes slowly, still half asleep, and stared toward the end of the bed. My phone was sitting there, neatly placed, right in the center, just above my feet. I didn't move for a second. I always keep my phone on the nightstand. Always. It's just habit. I don't fall asleep holding it, and I don't put it anywhere else. I pushed myself up slightly, blinking. The screen was off, just sitting there. I reached forward slowly and picked it up. It felt warm. Not hot, but warmer than it should have been after sitting unused. I pressed the button. The screen came on. Battery, 3%. I frowned. It had been fully charged when I went to bed. I remembered that clearly because I'd plugged it in earlier that evening. I looked toward the nightstand. The charging cable was still there, unplugged. I glanced back at the phone. No notifications. No apps open, just the home screen. I checked the time, 4:58 a.m. Too early. I sat there for a minute, holding it, trying to piece it together. Maybe I'd picked it up during the night. Maybe I'd been scrolling or something I didn't remember. But I don't do that. And even if I had, why would I put it at the foot of the bed? I looked down at the sheets. They were mostly undisturbed. No signs of me moving around much. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. The room felt normal, quiet, still. I walked over to the window and pulled the curtain back slightly. The sky was still dark, no light coming in yet. I turned back to the bed. The spot where the phone had been looked slightly different. Not obvious, just a faint crease in the sheets, like something had been placed there carefully. I stepped closer. The crease was centered, perfectly straight, like the phone had been aligned deliberately. I picked it up again, turning it over in my hand. The battery dropped to 2%. I frowned. That didn't feel right either. It shouldn't drain that fast, just sitting there. I checked the battery usage. Nothing unusual. No apps running in the background. No indication it had been heavily used. Just a steady drain over several hours. I sat back down on the bed, staring at it, trying to think. Then I noticed something else. The position of the pillow. It was slightly lower than usual, not by much, but enough that I could tell it had been moved. I reached up and adjusted it. The fabric felt cool, normal. I lay back down for a second, just to see how it felt. Everything seemed fine, but that feeling was still there, that something had happened while I was asleep. I sat up again, looked at the phone. The battery dropped to 1%. The screen dimmed slightly. I watched it. It didn't flicker, didn't glitch, just sat there. I got up and plugged it into the charger. The screen lit up brighter. Charging symbol appeared. Normal. I stepped back, looked around the room, nothing else out of place. Wardrobe closed, door still shut, no signs of anything. I walked to the door and opened it slightly. The hallway was dark, quiet. I stepped out and checked the rest of the house. Everything was as it should be. No doors open, no lights on, no signs of anyone being there. I went back into my room and closed the door. The phone was still on the charger. Battery creeping up slowly. I picked it up again. The warmth had faded. It felt normal now. I checked the time again. 5:02 a.m. Only a few minutes had passed. It felt longer. I set the phone back down on the nightstand this time, watched it for a second. Nothing happened. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to convince myself it was just one of those things. Something I'd done without remembering, but it didn't feel like that. It felt placed, deliberate. I lay back down again, staring at the ceiling. After a while, I must have drifted off again. When I woke up properly, it was light outside, around 8. The phone was still on the nightstand, charging normally. Everything looked fine. I got up, got dressed, went about my day. Tried not to think about it too much. But later, when I checked the phone again, I noticed something. In the camera roll, a single photo taken at 4:43 a.m. I opened it. It was my bed, from above, centered perfectly, and right in the middle, where the phone had been, was the spot where I'd found it. I noticed it because the ceiling didn't match the rest of the room. I'd been lying there for a while, not really asleep, just staring up in the dark. It was one of those nights where your brain won't switch off, so you just end up watching nothing. At some point, I realized there was a small patch of light above me. Not bright, just slightly brighter than everything else. I blinked a few times, thinking my eyes were adjusting or I'd caught some reflection from outside, but the rest of the ceiling stayed dark. Only that one spot had a faint glow. I shifted my head slightly on the pillow. The spot didn't move, it stayed fixed in place. I frowned and propped myself up on my elbows. The glow was circular, not perfectly sharp, but clearly defined, about the size of a dinner plate. I glanced toward the window. The curtains were fully closed, no light coming through, no gaps. I looked back at the ceiling. The glow was still there, same size, same intensity. "All right," I said quietly. I reached over and grabbed my phone from the nightstand, turning the screen on just enough to see the time, 2:48 a.m. I turned the screen off again. The room dropped back into darkness, except for that spot. I stared at it. It didn't flicker, didn't pulse, just sat there. I pushed myself up a bit more, sitting against the headboard now. The angle changed slightly. The glow stayed in the same place on the ceiling. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up. The floor felt cold under my feet. I took a few slow steps toward the center of the room, keeping my eyes on it. The glow didn't change, didn't get brighter or dimmer as I moved. It wasn't reacting to me at all. I stopped directly under it, looked straight up. The edges were soft, blended slightly into the darker ceiling around it, but it was definitely there. I raised my hand slowly, held it up into the light. Nothing happened, no shadow. That's what made me pause. Even a faint light should cast something. My hand just looked the same, dark, flat. I lowered it again, my chest felt tight. I glanced back at the window, still closed, no change. I looked around the room, nothing else out of place, just that one spot. I stepped back slightly, putting some distance between me and it. The glow stayed unchanged. I stood there for a minute, just watching. Then it shifted. Not position, size. It got smaller, slowly. Almost too slowly to notice at first, but it was definitely shrinking. The edges pulled inward, the circle tightened. I felt that pressure in my ears again. Subtle, but there. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I took a step closer again. The glow kept shrinking. Same steady pace, no flicker, no change in brightness, just less of it. I found myself holding my breath without meaning to, watching it, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. It kept getting smaller, from dinner plate size to something like a bowl, then smaller. A plate, a saucer. I stepped back again. The pressure in my ears eased slightly. I didn't take my eyes off it. It continued to shrink, now about the size of my hand. The edges were still soft, still blending into the ceiling, but the center looked slightly more intense now. Not brighter exactly, just more focused. I felt a slight warmth on my face, barely noticeable, like standing near something that had just been warmed. I raised my hand again, held it up toward the spot. Still no shadow. I pulled my hand back. The glow kept shrinking, now down to the size of a coin. My heart was beating faster now. I could feel it in my chest, in my throat. The pressure in my ears built again, slightly stronger this time. Then it stopped for a second, just a tiny point of light on the ceiling, perfectly still. Then it faded, not quickly, just gone, like it had never been there. The ceiling returned to complete darkness. I stood there, staring at the spot, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. The pressure in my ears disappeared. The room felt normal again. Quiet, still. I stayed standing there for a while, then slowly went back to the bed, sat down, looked up again. Nothing. I lay back down, staring at the same spot, trying to convince myself it had been some kind of light from outside, a reflection. But it hadn't behaved like that. It hadn't moved with me. It hadn't cast anything. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I remember, it was morning. Light coming through the curtains, normal daylight. I got up and looked at the ceiling straight away. Nothing unusual, just plain white. No marks, no discoloration. I stood on the bed and reached up, running my hand over the exact spot where the glow had been. The surface felt normal, smooth, cold. I stepped down and just stood there for a second, looking up. Everything looked exactly the same as it always had, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever that light had been, it hadn't come from outside the room. I saw the mist before I even thought anything was wrong. It just appeared in the beam of my headlights, hanging low across the road like a thin layer of smoke. Not thick enough to block visibility, just enough to notice. I slowed a little without thinking. It was late, around 1:20 a.m., and I was on a narrow road cutting through farmland outside Lincoln. No houses nearby, no traffic, just hedges on both sides and long stretches of nothing. The air had been clear up until that point, no fog anywhere else. But this patch, it just sat there. I eased my foot off the accelerator and watched it as I approached. The mist didn't drift, didn't swirl. It hung in place, perfectly still, like it had been poured across the road. "All right," I muttered. I checked my mirrors out of habit. Nothing behind me. I looked forward again. That's when it moved. Not the whole mist, just a section of it. It parted, cleanly. Like something had just passed through it. Not wind, not a gust. It split in a narrow path, straight down the middle, like a shape had pushed through it without disturbing the edges too much. I slowed more. My hands tightened on the wheel. There was nothing visible in the space it left behind. Just that thin gap in the mist. Then slowly, the mist closed again. sealing back over the road. I stopped the car, engine idling, headlights cutting through it. The mist looked normal again. Flat. Still, my chest felt tight. I glanced to the sides of the road. Nothing there, no movement in the hedges, no sound, just that quiet. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see deeper into the mist. It didn't look thicker ahead, just the same thin layer. I thought about turning around, but something about stopping there felt worse than just moving. So I put the car back into gear and rolled forward slowly. As the front of the car entered the mist, I watched closely. Nothing happened at first. Then, just ahead of the bonnet, it parted again, same as before, a narrow channel opening up, this time right in front of me, like something was moving just ahead of the car, clearing a path. I felt a sudden urge to stop again, but I didn't. I kept moving, slow, steady. The mist stayed split in front of me, always just out of reach. I couldn't see anything causing it, no shape, no shadow, just that absence in the mist. I leaned forward, squinting, trying to catch any detail. Nothing. The edges of the parted mist were too clean, too smooth, like they weren't being disturbed properly. I swallowed hard. "Keep going," I said quietly. The car rolled forward. The gap stayed ahead of me, always the same distance. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The mist didn't part again. It just stayed whole. I drove straight through it. The mist brushed over the car, soft and cold. For a second, it filled the headlights completely. Then I was out the other side. Clear road again, no mist behind me. I checked the mirrors. Nothing. Just the empty stretch of road. I let out a breath. Okay. I pressed the accelerator slightly, picking up speed. That's when I noticed the radio. It was off. Not just quiet. Off. The display was blank. I frowned and reached over, tapping the power button. It came back on immediately. But it wasn't on the station I'd been listening to. It was on the default screen, like it had just been reset. I stared at it for a second. No way. I scrolled through the presets. All gone. Every saved station. Cleared. I felt that tightness in my chest again. I checked the time. The clock on the dashboard was flashing. I looked at my phone. 1:37 a.m. That didn't line up. I knew what time it had been before. I'd checked it not long before hitting that stretch of road. It had been around 1:20. There was no way I'd lost that much time. I glanced back in the mirror again. Still nothing. No mist. No sign of anything. I drove faster now. Not speeding, but faster than I had been. Trying to put distance between me and that patch of road. The radio came back on properly after a minute, picking up a signal. But it sounded slightly off. Like the tuning wasn't quite right. A faint static underneath everything. I turned it down. Didn't want to listen to it. I kept driving until I reached a more populated area. Streetlights. Houses. Something normal. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a minute, engine running, hands still on the wheel. I looked at the radio again. The time had corrected itself. 1:52 a.m. The presets were still gone. I turned the car off and stepped out. The air felt normal. No mist, no strange quiet, just the usual night sounds. I walked around to the front of the car, not really sure why. Maybe just to check. The bonnet was damp, but not evenly. There was a narrow strip down the center, dry, perfectly straight, like something had passed over it. I felt it before I saw anything. Just standing there, keys in my hand, about to unlock the front door after work. It was late, maybe 11:40 p.m. Quiet street, no traffic, just that dull orange glow from the streetlights and the occasional flicker from someone's TV behind curtains. Then my ears popped, like when you're on a plane and it drops a bit too fast. Sharp pressure, then release. I stopped mid-step and swallowed, thinking maybe I'd just been tense or something. But it happened again, softer this time, like the pressure was still shifting. I looked up instinctively. The sky was clear, no clouds, a few stars visible between the streetlights, nothing unusual. I shook it off, turned back to the door, and that's when I noticed how quiet it was. Not just normal quiet, flat, like everything had been turned down slightly. Even the faint hum from the road a few streets over, gone. I stood there for a second, listening. Nothing. I stepped back off the porch and looked around. The houses were the same, lights on in a couple of windows, no movement, but the air felt tight. That's the only way I can describe it. Like the space around me had compressed slightly. Then my ears popped again, harder this time. I winced a bit, instinctively rubbing the side of my head, and that's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a shadow moving across the sky. Something dim, barely there. But it wasn't a cloud. It was too defined. A faint light drifting overhead. Not bright, not even clearly shaped. Just a soft, dull glow moving slowly across the sky. No sound. No blinking. Nothing like a plane. I stepped out further into the street, looking straight up now. The light didn't react, didn't change direction, just kept moving, steady. I could feel the pressure in my ears again, rising slightly as it passed above. I swallowed, trying to equalize it. Didn't help much. The light was hard to focus on, like it wasn't fully there. I could see it when I looked directly at it, but it felt like my eyes couldn't quite lock onto it properly. I blinked a few times, trying to sharpen the image. It didn't change, just drifted. I checked my phone, no signal, not even a single bar. That didn't happen often where I lived. I lowered the phone and looked back up. The light had moved slightly further along. Still silent, still steady. I noticed then that the street lights seemed dimmer, not off, just reduced, like something was pulling power away from them. I glanced at the nearest one. It flickered once, then steadied, but the light it gave off felt weaker. I looked back at the sky. The glow was still there, still moving. My ears popped again. This time it felt deeper, like it reached further inside. I exhaled slowly, trying to stay calm. There wasn't anything to react to, really. Just something happening. I took a step forward, following it slightly. The air felt cooler under it, not cold. Just a noticeable drop, like stepping into shade but without any sun. The light shifted slightly, not direction, just position, like it corrected itself. I stopped moving. It continued. For a second I thought I could see more of it. Not clearly, just an outline. Something curved, smooth, but faint enough that I couldn't be sure. Then it dimmed, not fading out, just becoming harder to see, until it wasn't there anymore. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the empty sky. My ears popped one last time, then the pressure eased. The normal sounds came back, distant traffic, a dog barking somewhere down the road. The streetlights seemed normal again. I checked my phone, signal returned, full bars. I looked at the time, 11:42. That didn't seem right. It felt longer. I stood there for another minute, just listening. Nothing unusual. Eventually I went inside, locked the door, sat down on the couch for a bit before going to bed. Didn't sleep much. The next morning, everything was normal. No signs of anything. I went about my day, trying not to think about it too much. But a couple nights later, I was outside again. Different reason, just taking the bins out. And as I stood there, my ears popped. Just once. Soft. I looked up straight away. The sky was empty. But for a moment, I had the feeling something had just passed overhead. The power went out so suddenly I thought something had tripped inside the house. I was in the living room, halfway through making a cup of tea, when everything just cut. Lights, kettle, even the hum from the fridge. No flicker, no warning, just off. For a second, I stood there in the dark, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. I checked my phone. No signal bars, which was odd, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I went to the window and looked out. The whole street was dark, every house. No porch lights, no TVs glowing through curtains, nothing. Even the street lights were out. That's when I realized it wasn't just my place. It was everything. My name's Daniel. I live in a small coastal town. Nothing busy, just rows of houses and a road that runs down toward the sea. You get power cuts now and then in bad weather, but it hadn't been storming or anything. The sky had been clear earlier. I grabbed a torch from the kitchen drawer and stepped outside. The air felt still, not cold, not warm, just flat. There were a couple of other people outside too. I saw my neighbor, Cyan, standing in her doorway looking up at the sky. "Whole area's out," she said quietly, like she didn't want to disturb something. I nodded. Must be a grid issue or something. She didn't respond to that, just kept looking up. I followed her gaze. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just a dark sky, a few stars faintly visible. Then I noticed the clouds. They weren't thick, just a thin layer drifting across, and there was a glow. Faint, barely there, outlining part of the cloud cover. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. The glow formed a circle, perfect. Not rough, not broken. A clean, smooth ring of light, just bright enough to separate itself from the darkness. And it wasn't moving. That's what stood out. Clouds usually drift, change shape, break apart. But this, it just sat there. The clouds within the circle looked slightly lighter, like they were being lit from behind. Outside the circle, everything was darker. I stepped further into the street. More people were coming out now. Quiet, everyone looking up, no one talking much. The glow didn't pulse, didn't flicker, just held steady. I checked the time on my phone, 9:42 p.m. I remember that clearly. I kept watching, waiting for it to change, expand, move, do something. But it didn't. It stayed exactly the same size, exactly the same brightness. Like it wasn't part of the sky at all, like it was just placed there. I looked around, half expecting to see some source for it. A helicopter, a spotlight, anything. Nothing. The entire area was dark, no light anywhere except that circle in the sky. I started to feel uneasy then, not scared, just wrong. Like something didn't line up. Cyan stepped closer to me. "Do you see that properly?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "What is it?" I didn't have an answer. We stood there for a few minutes. No one moved much, no one spoke loudly. It felt like we were all waiting for something to happen. Then, slowly, the glow faded. Not outward, not shrinking, just dimming. Evenly. Until it was gone. The clouds returned to normal, just faint shapes against the night. A few seconds later, the streetlights came back on, one by one, then the houses. You could hear appliances clicking back to life, the normal sounds of the neighborhood returning. People started talking again, quiet at first, then louder, trying to make sense of it. Someone mentioned it might have been a reflection from somewhere. Another said maybe it was something to do with the power outage. No one sounded convinced. I went back inside. Lights were working again, kettle came back on, everything normal, except my phone still had no signal. That came back about 10 minutes later. I checked the time again, 9:47. That didn't feel right. It had felt longer. I went to bed later than usual that night, couldn't stop thinking about it, the way it had just stayed there. Perfect. Still. A couple of days later, I asked around. Everyone had seen it. Same description, same circle, same fading. No one had a clear explanation. I even looked online. Nothing. No reports, no mentions, like it hadn't happened anywhere else. About a week after that, I was walking home late, around the same time. Power was on. Everything normal. I happened to glance up at the sky, and for a second, just a second, I thought I saw the faint outline of that same circle. Not glowing, just there, like a shadow in the clouds. Then it was gone. I didn't stop walking, just kept going. But now, whenever there's a clear night, I find myself looking up a bit longer than I used to, waiting to see if that shape shows up again. I was lying on the bonnet of my car when I saw it stop. Up until that point, everything about it looked normal. Just another light moving across the sky, like a satellite. You see them all the time if you stay still long enough. I'd parked up on a hill outside Skipton, engine off, just letting the car cool down after a late drive. It was clear, cold, no clouds, the kind of night where the sky looks deeper than usual. I had my hands behind my head, staring up, but not really thinking about anything. That's when I picked it out. A bright point of light moving slowly in a straight line from left to right. No blinking, no color change, just steady white. "Satellite," I said quietly to myself. I watched it drift. The movement was smooth, consistent, exactly what you'd expect. I tracked it for a few seconds, maybe 10, then it stopped. Not slowed. Stopped, instantly, like someone had paused it. I blinked, thinking I'd lost track of it for a second. But no, it was still there, just not moving. I pushed myself up slightly on my elbows. That's not right. I kept my eyes locked on it. The rest of the sky stayed still. Stars in their places, nothing else moving. Just that one point of light stopped. I waited for it to continue. It didn't. I glanced around briefly, checking if I'd mistaken it for something else, then looked back. Still there. Same brightness, same position. I sat up fully now, feet still resting on the ground, leaning back against the windscreen. The cold metal of the bonnet pressed against my back. I didn't feel it. I was too focused on that light. After a few seconds, I noticed something else. The air felt quieter. Not silent, but reduced, like the background noise had dropped. No distant cars, no wind. Even my own breathing sounded dull. I swallowed. The light stayed still, perfectly fixed. Then it dimmed. Not flickered, not blinked. Just slowly got less bright. I leaned forward slightly, like that would help me see it better. It continued to fade, evenly, like someone was lowering a dimmer switch. It didn't move, didn't drift, just faded, until it was gone. I stared at the spot where it had been. Nothing there now. just empty sky. I waited. Maybe it would come back. Maybe I'd just lost it. But it didn't reappear. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. All right. I leaned back again, resting against the windscreen. Tried to relax, but I couldn't stop looking at that spot. After a minute or two, I lay back down fully on the bonnet, hands behind my head again, eyes scanning the sky. Everything else looked normal. Stars in fixed positions, no other movement. I picked out another moving light. Far to the right this time. Same steady motion, same brightness. I watched it. It kept going. Didn't stop, didn't change, just moved across the sky and out of view. Okay, I said quietly. That's normal. I shifted slightly on the bonnet, adjusting my position. The metal felt colder now. I looked back to where the first light had been. Still nothing. Then I noticed something faint. Not a light, more like a slight darkening, barely visible, in the same area. I squinted, trying to focus on it. It wasn't a shape, just a subtle difference in the sky. Like the stars, there were slightly less sharp. I sat up again, leaning forward. The dark patch stayed, didn't move, didn't change. I held my breath. The pressure in my ears returned. Faint. But there. I looked around again. The rest of the sky was clear, sharp, normal. Only that one area looked off. I stood up from the bonnet. Gravel crunched under my shoes. The sound felt too loud. I stepped a few feet away from the car, looked up again. The dark patch was still there, same spot. I took a few steps to the side, changed my angle. It didn't shift, stayed fixed. I raised my hand, pointing toward it, trying to line it up. The stars around it looked slightly distorted. Not much, just enough to notice. Then slowly, the distortion faded. The stars sharpened again, back to normal. The pressure in my ears eased. The air felt lighter. I stood there for a moment longer, then looked away, back toward the horizon. Everything else looked unchanged. I walked back to the car and leaned against it, didn't lie down again, just stood there, looking up. Nothing else moved. No other lights stopped. No other changes. After a while, I got back in the car. Started the engine, the normal sounds came back. Radio static, engine noise. I pulled away from the hill slowly. As I drove, I checked the sky in the rearview mirror a few times. Nothing unusual, just the same clear night. But every now and then I caught myself looking back toward that spot, half expecting something to still be there, even though I knew it wasn't. I noticed it just as I came over the bend. At first, I thought it was someone in the field with a torch, just a dull white glow sitting low to the ground, maybe a few feet up. But it didn't look right. It wasn't lighting anything. The grass around it stayed completely dark, even though the glow itself was clearly visible. I slowed down a little, squinting through the windscreen. I was on a back road outside York, cutting through farmland. No houses nearby, no streetlights, just long stretches of road with fields on either side. It was late, around 11:30 p.m. Cold, clear, no wind. The glow stayed in place, didn't flicker, didn't move, just hung there. I eased my foot off the accelerator and let the car roll forward. The headlights stretched across the field as I got closer, but they didn't interact with the glow. It didn't reflect, didn't change. It just stayed. All right, I muttered. I checked my mirrors out of habit. Nothing behind me. I looked back at the field. The glow was still there. Same height, same intensity. I slowed more, almost to a crawl. The road was empty, so I didn't worry about stopping. I leaned slightly toward the passenger side, trying to get a better angle. The glow didn't shift, didn't react. It wasn't a point of light exactly, more like a soft patch, slightly brighter at the center, edges fading out. I felt that tightness in my chest again. I rolled the window down slightly. Cold air came in, like no sound, no hum, nothing coming from that direction. I watched it as I got closer. It stayed fixed in place until I was nearly parallel with it. Then it rose, straight up, no hesitation, no buildup, just lifted, silent. I froze. The car rolled forward a few feet on its own. The glow continued upward, same speed, same shape. It didn't get brighter, didn't dim, just moved. I pressed the brake lightly, stopping the car completely. The glow was now above the field, maybe 10 feet up, still rising. I leaned further toward the window, trying to keep it in view. It passed the height of the hedgerow, then above it. Still no effect on the surroundings, no shadows, no light spill, just itself. I swallowed. Okay, no. The glow kept going. Higher, straight line, no drift, no change in direction. I watched it until it reached maybe the height of a small building. Then, It faded, not instantly, just slowly, evenly, until it was gone. I stared at the empty space where it had been. I had nothing, just dark sky. I stayed there for a few seconds, engine idling, hands still on the wheel. Then I looked back down at the field. The spot where the glow had been looked normal, dark, flat, no marks, no movement. I sat there longer than I should have, trying to process it, trying to come up with something that made sense. Nothing did. Eventually, I took my foot off the brake and let the car move forward again. I didn't speed up, just drove. Eyes flicking between the road and the field, nothing else appeared. The rest of the drive was normal. Too normal. Like nothing had happened. When I got home, I parked in the driveway and sat there for a minute. Engine off. Silence settling in. I looked at my hands, still gripping the wheel slightly tighter than usual. I let go and exhaled. Just a light, I said. Even though I didn't believe it. I got out of the car. The air felt normal, cold, still. I walked around to the front without really thinking, just to check. The bonnet had a thin layer of moisture on it, dew. But right down the center, there was a narrow strip. Dry, perfectly straight, like something had passed over it. I stood there for a second, looking at it. Then I stepped back, looked up at the sky, nothing there. Just darkness. I went inside and locked the door behind me. Didn't look out the window again that night. But later, when I was lying in bed, I kept thinking about the way it had moved. Not drifting, not floating, just rising, like it had somewhere to go. I noticed it because it didn't move. I'd been standing in the same spot for a while, casting out and getting nothing back, just letting the line drift. The water was calm, barely any ripple, just that faint surface movement you get even when there's no wind. It was early evening, maybe around 7, and the light was starting to drop. Not dark yet, but that dull gray-blue where everything looks flatter. I was fishing alone at a reservoir outside Kielder. Quiet place, especially on a weekday. I hadn't seen anyone else since I got there. I reeled in slowly, more out of habit than anything. That's when I saw it, a faint glow beneath the water, not near the surface, deeper, maybe a few feet down. It was small, about the size of a plate, soft edges, pale, not bright enough to light anything around it, just there. I paused, holding the rod still. At first, I thought it was a reflection, something from above, but the sky was overcast, no direct light, and the glow didn't match anything around me. I leaned forward slightly, peering down. The water stayed calm. The glow didn't shift, didn't flicker, just sat there. I waited for it to move. It didn't. I lifted the rod slightly, pulling the line in a bit. The lure came up through the water. Nowhere near the glow. No reaction. I frowned. Probably just something under there, I muttered. But that didn't make sense either. Even something underwater would move, or distort the surface. This didn't. I stepped back from the edge, then forward again, changing my angle. The glow stayed in the same position relative to the bottom, not following my perspective. Fixed. I crouched down, bringing my face closer to the surface. The water was clear enough to see it properly now. It wasn't a solid object, more like a patch of light, slightly brighter at the center, fading outward, no defined edge. I watched it for a minute. Then 2. It didn't move, not even slightly. The rest of the water around it behaved normally. Tiny ripples, small movements, but the glow, perfectly still. I stood up slowly. Something about that stillness felt wrong. I looked around. The trees lining the reservoir were quiet, no wind, no birds. That struck me. There should have been something, but it was just quiet. I looked back down at the water. The glow was still there, unchanged. I picked up a small stone from the ground and tossed it into the water a few feet away from it. The splash broke the surface. Ripples spread outward. They passed over the glow. But the glow didn't distort, didn't flicker. It stayed exactly the same, like the ripples were happening on a different layer. I felt that tightness in my chest again. I took a step back, then another. The glow stayed, still, fixed. I glanced along the shoreline, half expecting to see someone else. There was no one. Just me, and that patch of light under the water. I looked back, it hadn't changed. I checked the time on my phone, 7:18 p.m. Only a few minutes had passed. It felt longer. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, stared at the water again. That's when it started to fade. Not quickly, not like it switched off, just slowly, evenly. The edges pulled inward, the center dimmed, but it didn't rise, didn't move toward the surface, just stayed where it was. getting weaker. I stepped closer again without thinking. The water looked darker around it now, as if the light had been holding something back. I leaned forward slightly, watching it. The glow shrank from plate size to something smaller, like a bowl, then a hand, then smaller. The water above it remained undisturbed. No bubbles, no movement, just that fading patch. I felt a slight pressure in my ears, barely noticeable. But there, I swallowed. It didn't change. The glow kept shrinking, now about the size of a coin, still in the same spot, still not rising. I held my breath, watching. Then it stopped, for a second. A tiny point of light beneath the water, then it disappeared. Gone. The water returned to normal, flat, dark, nothing beneath it. I stood there for a while, staring at the spot, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. The pressure in my ears eased. The silence lifted slightly. A faint breeze moved across the surface. Ripples formed naturally again. I picked up my rod, didn't cast, just held it. Looking down at where it had been, everything looked normal, exactly how it had before. I stayed there for another 10 minutes. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I packed up, didn't feel like staying. As I walked back toward the car, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. The water looked the same. But for a moment, just a second, I thought I saw a darker patch where the glow had been. Not a light, just absence, then it was gone. I didn't notice it until the next morning. I was making coffee, still half awake, when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the garden camera. It was odd because it was from the night before, not live. The timestamp said 02:16 a.m. I hadn't heard anything during the night. I opened the clip while the kettle was boiling. At first, it looked normal. The garden was still. Fence, shed, the patch of grass, all exactly as usual. The camera angle covered the whole yard from the back of the house. No movement, no sound. Then, about 3 seconds in, something changed. It wasn't a shape. It wasn't even something I could point to. The image shifted, like the air itself bent, a ripple. That's the closest thing I can call it. It started near the left side of the frame, low to the ground, and moved across the garden. Not fast, but not slow either. Just a smooth, steady pass. The grass beneath it didn't move. The fence didn't move, but the image over them distorted slightly, like looking through heat haze. I leaned closer to the screen. What is that? The ripple reached the middle of the garden, and then the footage jumped. The timestamp skipped forward to 15. 7 seconds gone. I frowned and scrubbed back. Watched it again. Same thing. Normal. Ripple. Skip. Normal. I paused it just before the distortion, zoomed in. Everything looked fine. I played it frame by frame. The ripple appeared gradually. Not a sudden glitch. It built, like something entering the frame. Then the skip. I leaned back slightly, staring at the screen. The kettle clicked off behind me. I didn't move. I replayed it again and again. Each time it felt the same. Not like a camera error. Too smooth, too consistent. I switched to the driveway camera, scrolled to the same time, opened the clip, normal view of the front of the house, empty drive, no movement. Then, a flicker. The image dimmed slightly, and I caught a hint of the same thing, a distortion near the edge of the frame. But this time it didn't cross fully, it just touched the corner. Then, another skip. 6 seconds missing. I felt that tightness in my chest again. I went back to the garden footage, paused it at the last frame before the skip, stared at it. There was something else there, barely visible, in the center of the ripple. Not a shape, more like a denser patch of distortion, as if the air was bending more strongly there. I scrubbed forward to the first frame after the skip. Everything was normal again, but something had changed. The grass, it looked slightly flattened, not obviously, just a subtle difference, like it had been pressed down for a moment. I stepped away from the counter and walked to the back door, opened it. Cold air came in. The garden looked normal, exactly like the footage. I stepped outside, walked toward the center of the lawn. The grass felt normal under my feet, but when I reached the middle, I noticed something. A faint line. Not a clear path, just a slight variation, like the grass had been disturbed in a narrow strip. I crouched down, ran my hand over it. It felt smoother, not broken, not crushed, just pressed. I followed it slowly. It ran from one side of the garden to the other, almost perfectly straight. I stood up and looked back at the house. Tried to match the line to what I'd seen in the footage. It lined up. Exactly. I went back inside and watched the clip again. this time focusing on the timing. The ripple reached the center of the garden, then the skip. 7 seconds. I checked the system logs. No errors, no dropped frames reported. Nothing to explain the gap. I checked the indoor camera next, the one facing the kitchen. Scrolled to 0216. Opened the clip. The kitchen was dark, still. Then, a flicker. The light level dropped slightly, like something had passed in front of the camera, but there was nothing visible. Then the timestamp jumped. Same gap, 6 or 7 seconds. I leaned back against the counter. The house felt quieter than it should have been. I glanced toward the back door, still open. Garden visible, nothing out of place. I walked over and closed it, locked it, turned back. The phone was still in my hand. I watched the clip one more time. The ripple, the skip, the return to normal. It didn't feel random. It felt continuous, like whatever had caused the distortion hadn't stopped during those missing seconds. Just that the camera hadn't recorded it, or couldn't. I set the phone down slowly, looked around the room. Everything was still, quiet, normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had crossed the garden hadn't just passed through it. I noticed it because it didn't move with the fog. Everything else did. I'd been driving for maybe an hour through thick fog, the kind where your headlights just bounce back at you and you feel like you're inside a tunnel. It was slow going, barely above 30, just following the faint outline of the road. Then I saw the light. It was above the tree line, off to the left. Pale, not bright, just enough to stand out against the gray. I eased off the accelerator without thinking. The fog shifted around it, drifting slowly, but the light stayed perfectly still. Probably a house, I muttered, but there weren't any houses out there, just woodland and fields. I glanced at the sat-nav, no roads branching off nearby. I looked back at the light, still there, same height, same intensity. I slowed more. The car crawled forward. The fog thinned slightly for a second, and I got a clearer look. It wasn't a point, more like a small patch, soft edges, no defined source. It didn't illuminate the trees beneath it, didn't cast anything. It just hovered there. I felt that tightness in my chest again. I checked my mirrors. Nothing behind me. I looked back to the left. The light hadn't moved. I rolled the window down slightly. Cold air came in. No sound. No hum. Nothing. I kept driving. The road curved gently, bringing me slightly closer to the tree line. The fog shifted again. The light stayed fixed. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see more detail. Nothing changed. The edges of it stayed soft, like it wasn't fully solid. I slowed almost to a stop. The car idled quietly. I stared at it. Then for a moment the fog thinned more. Not completely, just enough to see the trees clearly. Branches, leaves, the outline of trunks. But where the light was, there was nothing. No source, no object, just empty space. And the light. I felt a slight pressure in my ears. Subtle, but there. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I opened the door slowly and stepped out. The cold hit me straight away. The air felt damp, heavy. I stood by the car looking toward the trees. The light stayed in place, unchanged. I took a few steps away from the car. Gravel crunched under my shoes, too loud. The sound didn't seem to carry. I stopped. The light didn't react, didn't flicker, didn't shift. I took another step. The fog moved slightly around it. The light didn't. I looked up at it directly. It felt closer now, even though I hadn't moved much, like the distance was wrong. I took a breath. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I stepped back. The light stayed. Same position. I glanced back at the car, headlights still on, cutting through the fog. Everything behind me looked normal. I turned back. The light was still there. Then the fog shifted again, more noticeably this time, like a slow wave passing through. It rolled across the trees, and as it did, the light faded. Not instantly, just less, still visible, but weaker. I stood there watching. The fog continued to thin. The trees became clearer, more defined, and the light disappeared. Gone. Completely. I stared at the spot where it had been. Nothing there. Just branches. Dark shapes against the clearing fog. The pressure in my ears eased. I let out a breath. The air felt normal again. The sounds came back. Faint wind, distant rustling. I stood there for a few seconds longer, then turned and got back in the car. Closed the door. Sat there, hands on the wheel, looking straight ahead. The fog was still there, but lighter now. I checked the time, 1:14 a.m. I didn't remember what it had been before. I started the engine fully and pulled back onto the road. I didn't look to the left again, just kept my eyes on the road. The fog cleared gradually as I drove. By the time I reached the next stretch, it was almost gone. Everything looked normal. Too normal. When I finally got home, I sat in the driveway for a minute, engine off, silence settling in. I looked at the trees across the road. Nothing there, just darkness. I went inside, locked the door, tried not to think about it, but later when I lay in bed, I kept picturing it. That pale patch above the trees, not moving, not reacting, just there. And the moment when the fog cleared enough to show, there had been nothing holding it at all. I noticed it because I was watching my feet. It had been raining earlier, not heavy, just enough to leave the pavement damp and reflective. The streetlights made everything look brighter than it actually was, and I'd been half distracted watching my shadow stretch and shrink as I walked. It was late, maybe just after midnight. The street was empty. No cars, no people, just that quiet you get when everything's shut and there's nothing left moving. I passed under one streetlight, watched my shadow shorten, then lengthen again as I moved out from under it. Normal. Then I walked into the next one, and it disappeared. Not faded, not distorted. Gone. I stopped mid-step, looked down. The pavement was still lit, the light was on, but there was no shadow. I shifted slightly, moving my foot. Nothing. I raised my hand slowly, no outline, no movement, just the light and the wet pavement. I frowned and stepped backward. The moment I moved out of the center of the light, my shadow came back. Sharp, normal. I stepped forward again, into the light. Gone. My chest tightened slightly. That's weird. I looked up at the streetlight. It was working fine. No flicker, no dimming, just a steady yellow glow. I looked back down. Nothing. No shadow. I moved my arm again. Slower this time. No change. I stepped backward once more. The shadow snapped back into place behind me. I turned slightly, trying to see if the angle mattered. Stepped forward again. Still nothing. It was like the light wasn't casting anything from me at all. I swallowed. The air felt a little heavier. Not much, just enough to notice. I glanced up and down the street. Empty. No movement. No sound. I stepped fully out from under the light. My shadow stretched long behind me again. Normal. I turned around and looked back at the streetlight. Nothing unusual about it. Same as all the others, I walked back toward it slowly. Stopped just before stepping into the light. My shadow was still there. I took a breath, then stepped forward. It disappeared instantly. Not gradually, just gone. I stood there looking down. The pavement glistened slightly, reflecting the light, but no outline, no shape, nothing. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other. Still nothing. I felt that faint pressure in my ears again. Subtle, but there. I looked up. The light above me seemed slightly brighter than the others. Not by much, just enough to feel off. I stepped back again. My shadow returned. I exhaled slowly. Then, without really thinking about it, I walked further down the street, toward the next light. I kept my eyes on the ground. My shadow moved with me. Normal. I stepped under the next streetlight. It stayed. Didn't disappear. I turned slightly. Moved my arm. Everything behaved as it should. I glanced back at the previous light. Still on. Still steady. I walked back toward it. Slowly. Watching my shadow. As I crossed into its light. Gone. Again. Same as before. I stopped. Looked down. Nothing. I took another step forward. Still nothing. I stepped back. The shadow returned. Sharp. Defined. I frowned and looked around. The rest of the street looked normal. Lights casting shadows the way they should. Only this one behaved differently. I stepped into it again. Gone. I stood there longer this time. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I looked up. The light didn't flicker, didn't change. But something about it felt fixed. Like it wasn't just lighting the ground. I took a slow step forward, still within the light. No shadow. I turned slowly in a circle. Nothing. No outline in any direction. I stopped, facing the direction I'd been walking. That's when I noticed something else. The ground ahead looked slightly darker, not by much, just enough to notice, like the light wasn't reaching as far as it should. I took another step forward. The pressure in my ears peaked. Then it stopped. Instantly, I blinked. The shadow returned, right there behind me. Sharp, normal. I looked down. Everything was as it should be. I stepped back under the light again. The shadow stayed, didn't disappear this time. I frowned, took another step. Still there. I moved my arm, watched it shift. Normal. I looked up at the streetlight. It looked exactly the same. No change. I stood there for a few seconds, waiting. Nothing happened. The pressure in my ears was gone. The air felt normal again. I stepped away from the light. My shadow followed. As expected, I didn't go back under it again. Just kept walking. The rest of the street was normal. Every light behaved the way it should. My shadow stayed with me. Nothing else happened. When I got home, I stopped outside for a second, looked down at the pavement under the porch light. My shadow stretched out in front of me. Clear. Solid. I stood there for a moment longer, then went inside. But later, lying in bed, I kept thinking about it. That moment under the light, when there had been nothing, and how for those few seconds, it hadn't been that my shadow was missing. It felt more like the light just wasn't touching me at all. I woke up already sitting halfway upright. I didn't remember moving. 1 second I was asleep, and the next I was staring straight at the window like I'd been pulled there. My heart was already racing. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was the feeling that someone had just been standing there, right by the window, close enough that if the glass hadn't been there, they would have been inside. I didn't move. I just stared. The room was dim, that early morning light just starting to come through the curtains. Not bright enough to see clearly, but enough to make out shapes. Everything looked normal. Curtains drawn, window shut, nothing there. But the feeling didn't go away. It stayed, like I just missed something. I swallowed. My throat felt dry. I checked the time on my phone without taking my eyes off the window. 5:03 a.m. Too early. I sat there for a few seconds, listening. Nothing. No footsteps outside. No sound of movement, no voices, just quiet. I swung my legs over the side of the bed slowly. The floor felt cold under my feet. I stood up, took a few careful steps toward the window. The closer I got, the stronger the feeling became, like something had been there recently, not hours ago, seconds. I stopped about a foot away. The curtains were still, no movement. I reached out and touched the fabric, cool, normal. I slid my hand along the edge and pulled it back slightly. The glass was right there, clear, no condensation, no marks. I leaned closer, looking outside. The street was empty, same parked cars, same quiet houses, nothing out of place. I stared for a few seconds longer, then I reached out and pressed my palm against the glass. It felt warm, not hot, just warmer than it should have been. I pulled my hand back quickly, looked at it, then touched the glass again. Same thing, a noticeable warmth. Not across the whole window, just in one area, right about where someone's chest would be if they were standing there. I felt that tightness in my chest again. I moved my hand slowly across the glass. The warmth faded as I moved away from that spot, then returned as I came back to it. A patch, about the size of a torso. I stepped back. The air in the room felt slightly heavier near the window. I hadn't noticed it before. Now I could. Subtle. But there. I looked outside again. Still nothing. No one. No movement. I turned slightly, glancing around the room. Everything else felt normal. Then I looked back at the glass. The warm patch was still there, unchanged. I raised my hand again, held it just above the surface. I could feel it without touching it. A faint heat, like standing near something that had just been there. I swallowed. My ears felt slightly pressured. I hadn't noticed when that started. I stepped back another pace. The warmth stayed where it was, fixed, not spreading, not fading, just there. I stood there for what felt like a long time, watching it, waiting for it to change. It didn't. Eventually I turned away, walked back to the bed, sat down, still facing the window. I didn't want to lose sight of it. I picked up my phone again, 5:07 a.m. Only a few minutes had passed. It felt longer. I looked back at the glass. The warm patch was still there, but maybe slightly less. I wasn't sure. I stood up again, walked back over, pressed my hand against it. Still warm, but not as strong. I kept my hand there for a few seconds, then pulled it away. The warmth continued to fade, slowly, evenly, like it was dissipating. I watched it. The pressure in my ears eased slightly. The air felt lighter. After a minute or two, the glass felt normal again, cold like the rest of the window. I stood there, staring at it. Nothing remained. No marks, no condensation, no sign of anything. I pulled the curtain back further, looked outside again. The street was still empty. No one walking, no cars moving, just early morning stillness. I closed the curtain, turned back toward the bed. The room felt normal again, quiet, still. I sat down slowly, tried to steady my breathing. After a while, I lay back down, stared at the ceiling. At some point, I must have drifted off again. When I woke up properly, it was full daylight. Everything looked normal. I got up and went straight to the window, pressed my hand against the glass. Cold. No warmth, no difference. I stood there for a minute, then reached up and checked the lock. Still in place. No sign it had been opened. I stepped back, looked at the whole window. Nothing out of place. But as I turned away, I had this brief thought that whatever had been standing there hadn't needed to come inside at all. I noticed it because the wind just stopped. Not faded, not died down. Stopped. 1 second, I could hear it moving through the trees, that constant rustling you get in the woods at night, and the next, there was nothing. I sat up straight in the tent. The silence felt wrong immediately. I'd been lying there listening to it, not really sleeping, just watching the faint outline of the tent fabric in the dark. It had been a steady background noise for hours. Then it was gone. Completely. I held still, listening. Nothing. No wind, no leaves, no distant movement, not even the small sounds you usually ignore. It was like everything had been muted. I checked my phone. 2:17 a.m. I put it back down and stayed still for a moment longer. "All right," I whispered. My voice sounded flat, like it didn't carry properly. I unzipped the tent slowly, careful not to make too much noise, even though I didn't know why that mattered. The zip sounded louder than it should have. Sharp, out of place. I pushed the flap open and looked out. The trees stood still, every branch, every leaf, no movement at all. I stepped out onto the ground. The air felt heavy, not warm, just thick, like it wasn't moving. I turned slowly, looking around. Nothing. No animals, no sound, just that complete stillness. I'd set up camp in a small clearing off a trail in the Lake District, not far from a path, but far enough that I hadn't seen anyone since late afternoon. It had felt quiet before. This was something else. I took a few steps away from the tent. The ground crunched under my boots. Too loud. The sound didn't seem to spread. It just stayed close. I stopped again. Listened. Nothing. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting, a slight distortion between the trees, like heat haze. But there was no heat. The air was cold. I squinted, trying to focus on it. The distortion moved. Not quickly, just a slow, steady shift from left to right. It didn't follow the shape of anything, didn't match the trees. It passed through them, or between them. I took a step back. My chest tightened. The distortion became slightly clearer, not visible in a solid way, just the sense that the air there wasn't behaving the same. Like looking through glass that's slightly warped, it moved across the clearing. No sound, no effect on anything around it. The grass didn't move, the trees didn't react, it just passed. I stood frozen, watching it, trying to understand what I was seeing. The pressure in my ears built slightly, like being underwater. I swallowed. It didn't help. The distortion reached the other side of the clearing. Then it stopped, just for a second, perfectly still. Then it continued, moving into the trees and disappearing, not fading, just gone. The air returned to normal immediately. The wind came back all at once. Leaves rustling, branches shifting, the usual sounds of the forest rushing back in. I staggered slightly. The sudden noise felt overwhelming. I turned in a slow circle. Everything looked normal again. Trees moving, grass shifting, nothing out of place. I stood there for a minute, breathing hard, trying to steady myself. Then I looked back toward where the distortion had passed. Nothing. Just trees. Normal. I walked slowly back to the tent. Every step felt too loud again, but the sound carried normally this time. I crouched down and looked inside. Everything was as I'd left it. Sleeping bag, pack, nothing disturbed. I sat on the edge of the tent opening, listening. The wind sounded normal now, consistent, alive. But something still felt off. I reached down and touched the ground where the distortion had crossed the clearing. It felt cold, damp, normal. I ran my hand over the grass, nothing unusual. I stood up again, looked out into the trees. For a moment, I thought I saw something else, further back. Another slight shift in the air, but it was gone before I could focus on it. I went back into the tent and zipped it closed. Sat there for a while, listening. Everything stayed normal. The wind didn't stop again. The sounds didn't disappear. But I didn't lie back down straight away. I stayed sitting, staring at the fabric of the tent, trying to process it. After a while, I did lie down, pulled the sleeping bag up, closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep much. Every time the wind shifted slightly, I opened my eyes again, expecting it to stop. It didn't. By the time morning came, everything felt normal again. Light filtering through the trees, birds starting up, the usual sounds. I packed up and left earlier than I'd planned. As I walked back toward the trail, I passed the edge of the clearing again. I slowed for a second, looked at the spot where it had crossed. Nothing there, just grass. But for a moment, I had this strange feeling that whatever had moved through the trees hadn't been affected by anything around it at all. I only noticed it because of the reflection. I'd been driving for a while, just following the road without really thinking, when something caught in the edge of my vision. A brief flash above the windscreen, like light bouncing off metal. I looked up instinctively. Nothing there. I frowned and kept driving. The road was empty, cutting through open moorland somewhere past Hexham. No streetlights, no houses, just that long stretch of dark with my headlights carving a path through it. I adjusted my grip on the wheel and glanced up again. Nothing. Probably nothing, I muttered. Then it happened again. A sharper reflection this time. Above me. Not in front. Not to the side. Directly above. I slowed down slightly, eyes scanning the sky, and then I saw it. For a second. Something smooth, flat, high up. It caught the edge of my headlights just right, like a dull metallic surface. It wasn't bright, more like a soft sheen. Then it tilted, just slightly, like it was adjusting its angle, and disappeared. Not drifted, not faded, just gone. Upward, upward, instant. I hit the brake without thinking. The car slowed hard, tires crunching slightly against the rough surface. I pulled to the side of the road and stopped. Engine still running, headlights still on. I stared up through the windscreen. Nothing. Just sky. Cloudless. Empty. I turned the engine off. The sudden quiet made everything feel sharper. I opened the door and stepped out. The air was cold. Still. No wind. I walked a few steps away from the car, looking straight up. Nothing. No movement. No sound. I turned slowly, scanning every part of the sky. Completely empty. I stood there for a minute, trying to steady my breathing, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. I'd seen the reflection, seen it tilt, seen it go. I got back in the car and started the engine again. The headlights flared back on. I pulled back onto the road. Drove slower this time, eyes flicking up every few seconds. Nothing happened for a while, just the road, the darkness, the steady hum of the engine. Then I noticed something else. The beam of the headlights looked shorter. Not by much, just slightly, like the light wasn't reaching as far as it should. I leaned forward a bit, trying to see further down the road. The edges faded into darkness sooner than they should have. I flicked the high beams on, no real difference, still felt cut off. I tightened my grip on the wheel. All right, I kept driving. A few minutes passed, then I saw it again. Not directly this time, off to the right, another reflection, quick, sharp. I looked up immediately, and there it was, higher than before. Same smooth surface, same dull metallic sheen. It didn't have a clear shape, just a presence. Like something was there, but I couldn't quite define it. It tilted again, slow, controlled, then gone, upward. No acceleration, no build-up, just vanished. I hit the brake again. This time I didn't pull over fully, just slowed to a near stop in the middle of the road. My heart was pounding now. I looked up through the windscreen. Nothing. I leaned forward, trying to see more. The sky looked empty, but it didn't feel empty. I opened the door again and stepped out. Looked straight up. Still nothing. I listened. No sound, no hum, nothing. But the air felt different, heavier, like something had just moved through it. I stood there longer this time, trying to catch anything, a glimpse, a sound. Nothing came. Eventually, I got back in the car, shut the door, sat there for a second, hands on the wheel. Then I noticed something, the dashboard clock. It was flashing. Reset. Reset. I frowned and checked my phone. 1:48 a.m. That didn't line up. I knew what time it had been before. I checked it earlier. It hadn't been that late. I stared at the clock, then looked back up at the sky. Still nothing. I started the engine again and drove. Faster now. Not speeding, but faster than I had been. The headlights looked normal again, reaching as far as they should. The road felt normal. Everything felt normal. Too normal. I didn't stop until I reached a stretch with streetlights. Real light. Something familiar. When I finally got home, I parked in the driveway and just sat there, engine off, silence settling in. I looked up one last time. The sky was clear, empty. Nothing unusual. I got out of the car and walked around to the front, not really sure why, just instinct. The bonnet had a thin layer of dust on it, except for one spot, a faint oval shape, clean, right in the center, like something had hovered there. The power went out while I was halfway through making tea. Everything just cut at once. Lights, kettle, the quiet hum of the fridge. The house dropped into silence so suddenly it felt like something had been pulled out of it. I stood there for a second, hands still on the counter. Right, I said quietly. It wasn't unusual for the power to go out where I lived. Small village, older lines. It usually came back within a few minutes. I grabbed my phone. No signal. That was less normal. I walked into the living room and pulled the curtain back. The whole street was dark. No porch lights, no street lamps, just the faint outline of houses and parked cars under a low, heavy sky. Clouds hung thick overhead. No stars. I leaned slightly closer to the glass. That's when I noticed the glow. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting, a faint patch in the clouds, but it didn't look like light bleeding through from anywhere. It was contained, circular, soft-edged, just sitting there above the rooftops. I frowned and stepped outside. The air was cool still. A few doors down, someone else had come out. I could hear a voice, low, talking to someone I couldn't see. "Power's gone again," they said. I didn't respond. I was looking at the sky. The glow stayed in place. It didn't flicker, didn't spread. Just a soft circle, barely brighter than the clouds around it. I took a few steps onto the pavement. The gravel crunched under my shoes, too loud in the quiet. I looked around briefly. No one else seemed to be looking up. I turned back to the sky. The glow was still there. Same size, same intensity. I tried to judge its distance. It didn't make sense. It looked close, but also far. Like it wasn't sitting in the clouds, but behind them, or inside them. I swallowed. The air felt heavier. I became aware of a faint pressure in my ears. Subtle, but noticeable. I tilted my head slightly, trying to clear it. It didn't change. I stepped further into the street. The glow didn't move, didn't react. It just existed. I waited for it to grow or shift or do anything. It didn't. The edges stayed soft, the center slightly brighter, but it didn't illuminate anything. The clouds around it stayed dark. The houses below remained in shadow. It was like it wasn't casting light at all, just showing itself. I glanced back toward my house. The windows were dark, everything still. I looked up again. The glow remained, unchanged. Then, slowly, it began to fade. Not outward, not spreading, just dimming. The circles stayed the same size. The edges stayed the same shape, but the brightness dropped, evenly, like someone turning a dial. The pressure in my ears eased slightly. I took a step back. The glow continued to fade, still not moving, still not spreading, just becoming less. I stood there watching it, waiting for something else. Nothing came. After a few seconds, it was barely visible. Then, gone. The clouds returned to their normal dull gray. Nothing in them, no trace of the shape. I kept looking at the same spot, trying to see it again. Nothing. A second later, the streetlights flickered on, one by one. Then the houses. Lights returning behind windows, the quiet hum of electricity coming back, the normal sounds of the street creeping in again. I blinked, looked around. Everything felt normal, too normal. "Back on," someone called from down the road. "Yeah," another voice answered. I looked up one last time. The sky was just clouds again. No glow. No shape. I stood there for another minute, then turned and went back inside. The kettle had reset. I turned it back on. The familiar sound filled the kitchen. I leaned against the counter, staring at nothing for a moment. Then I glanced out the window again. Just clouds. But for a second, I had this strange thought that whatever that shape had been, hadn't been lighting the clouds. It had been behind them. I felt it before I saw anything. Just a quick drop, like the car settled suddenly on its suspension. Not a jolt, not like something hit it. More like a brief heavy weight had pressed down on the roof and then eased off. I looked up immediately. Nothing. The car was still. Engine off, keys out, just sitting there exactly how I'd left it. I was parked in a lay-by just outside Kendall, pulled over to take a break. It was late, around 12:30 a.m., and the road had been empty for miles. I sat there for a second, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. "Probably just settling," I muttered. Even as I said it, I knew it didn't feel like that. I shifted slightly in the seat. No movement. No sound. I glanced at the rearview mirror. That's when I saw the glow. Faint. Not bright enough to light anything up. Just a soft patch sitting in the reflection. I frowned and leaned forward a little. The back window looked normal beyond it. Dark. Empty. The glow didn't seem to come from any source I could identify. It didn't look like headlights. Didn't flare. Didn't reflect properly. It just sat there. I twisted in my seat and looked over my shoulder. Nothing. Just the empty road behind me. I turned back to the mirror. The glow was still there. Same size, same position. I reached up and adjusted the mirror slightly. The glow stayed centered, didn't shift relative to the mirror. That made my chest tighten. I sat back slowly. The air inside the car felt heavier. I couldn't hear anything outside. No wind, no distant cars. Just that closed, still silence. Then I felt it again. The same downward pressure. Short, subtle, like something pressing on the car and then releasing. The suspension dipped just enough to feel. I froze. The glow in the mirror flickered. Not like a light turning off, more like it shifted slightly, changed shape for a moment, then settled again. I swallowed. All right. I reached for the door handle. Didn't open it yet. Just held it. The glow stayed steady. I leaned forward again, trying to get a better look. It wasn't a clear shape, just a soft oval, slightly brighter at the center. I slowly opened the door. The moment it clicked open, the glow disappeared. Completely. The mirror just showed darkness again. I stepped out. Cold air hit me, the kind that feels sharp in your lungs. I stood there beside the car, looking around. Nothing. No lights. No movement. The road stretched out behind me, empty. I walked around to the back of the car, looked through the rear window. Nothing. I stepped back and looked up. The sky was clear, no clouds, stars visible normal. I stood there for a minute, listening. Nothing. No sound at all. Then I got back in, closed the door. The moment it shut, the glow returned, exactly where it had been before, same faint oval in the mirror. My heart started beating faster. I stared at it. The air inside the car felt thicker again. I checked over my shoulder. Nothing. Looked back at the mirror. Still there. Then the pressure came again, longer this time. The car dipped slightly more, not enough to make a noise, just enough to feel, like something had settled onto it. The glow brightened slightly, still faint, but more defined now. I gripped the steering wheel, didn't realize I was doing it. The glow shifted upward in the mirror, just a little, like whatever it was had moved. Then it steadied. The pressure eased. I exhaled slowly. Didn't even realize I'd been holding my breath. Just go, I said quietly. I turned the key. The engine came to life. The dashboard lit up. The headlights flared on. The glow in the mirror didn't change, didn't react to the light. It just stayed there. I put the car into gear, started to pull out. As the car moved forward, the glow remained fixed in the mirror. Same distance, same position. It didn't fall behind, didn't get closer. It just stayed. After a few seconds, the pressure in the car lifted completely. The air felt normal again. The glow began to fade, slowly, evenly, until it was gone. The mirror showed only the road behind me, empty. I didn't stop. I kept driving, faster than I had been before. Not speeding, but faster. The road felt longer now, quieter. When I finally reached a stretch with streetlights, I slowed down slightly. The normal glow of them felt grounding. I checked the mirror again. Nothing. Just the road. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping. When I parked in my driveway, I sat there for a minute. Engine off. Hands still on the wheel. I looked at the mirror one last time. Nothing there. I got out of the car, walked around to the roof without really thinking, ran my hand across it. The metal felt slightly warm. Not everywhere, just in the center. A patch, roughly oval, like something had been resting there. I noticed it because I was watching my feet. It had been raining earlier, not heavy, just enough to leave the pavement damp and reflective. The streetlights made everything look brighter than it actually was, and I'd been half distracted watching my shadow stretch and shrink as I walked. It was late, maybe just after midnight. The street was empty. No cars, no people, just that quiet you get when everything's shut and there's nothing left moving. I passed under one streetlight, watched my shadow shorten, then lengthen again as I moved out from under it. Normal. Then I walked into the next one, and it disappeared. Not faded, not distorted. Gone. I stopped mid-step, looked down. The pavement was still lit, the light was on, but there was no shadow. I shifted slightly, moving my foot. Nothing. I raised my hand slowly, no outline, no movement, just the light and the wet pavement. I frowned and stepped backward. The moment I moved out of the center of the light, my shadow came back. Sharp, normal. I stepped forward again, into the light. Gone. My chest tightened slightly. That's weird. I looked up at the streetlight. It was working fine. No flicker, no dimming, just a steady yellow glow. I looked back down. Nothing. No shadow. I moved my arm again. Slower this time. No change. I stepped backward once more. The shadow snapped back into place behind me. I turned slightly, trying to see if the angle mattered. Stepped forward again. Still nothing. It was like the light wasn't casting anything from me at all. I swallowed. The air felt a little heavier. Not much, just enough to notice. I glanced up and down the street. Empty. No movement. No sound. I stepped fully out from under the light. My shadow stretched long behind me again. Normal. I turned around and looked back at the streetlight. Nothing unusual about it. Same as all the others, I walked back toward it slowly. Stopped just before stepping into the light. My shadow was still there. I took a breath, then stepped forward. It disappeared instantly. Not gradually, just gone. I stood there looking down. The pavement glistened slightly, reflecting the light, but no outline, no shape, nothing. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other. Still nothing. I felt that faint pressure in my ears again. Subtle, but there. I looked up. The light above me seemed slightly brighter than the others. Not by much, just enough to feel off. I stepped back again. My shadow returned. I exhaled slowly. Then, without really thinking about it, I walked further down the street, toward the next light. I kept my eyes on the ground. My shadow moved with me. Normal. I stepped under the next street light. It stayed. Didn't disappear. I turned slightly. Moved my arm. Everything behaved as it should. I glanced back at the previous light. Still on. Still steady. I walked back toward it. Slowly. Watching my shadow. As I crossed into its light. Gone. Again. Same as before. I stopped. Looked down. Nothing. I took another step forward. Still nothing. I stepped back. The shadow returned. Sharp. Defined. I frowned and looked around. The rest of the street looked normal. Lights casting shadows the way they should. Only this one behaved differently. I stepped into it again. Gone. I stood there longer this time. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I looked up. The light didn't flicker. Didn't change. But something about it felt fixed. Like it wasn't just lighting the ground. I took a slow step forward. Still within the light. No shadow. I turned slowly in a circle. Nothing. No outline in any direction. I stopped, facing the direction I'd been walking. That's when I noticed something else. The ground ahead looked slightly darker, not by much, just enough to notice, like the light wasn't reaching as far as it should. I took another step forward. The pressure in my ears peaked. Then it stopped. Instantly, I blinked. The shadow returned, right there behind me. Sharp, normal. I looked down. Everything was as it should be. I stepped back under the light again. The shadow stayed, didn't disappear this time. I frowned, took another step. Still there. I moved my arm, watched it shift. Normal. I looked up at the streetlight. It looked exactly the same. No change. I stood there for a few seconds, waiting. Nothing happened. The pressure in my ears was gone. The air felt normal again. I stepped away from the light. My shadow followed. As expected. I didn't go back under it again. Just kept walking. The rest of the street was normal. Every light behaved the way it should. My shadow stayed with me. Nothing else happened. When I got home, I stopped outside for a second, looked down at the pavement under the porch light. My shadow stretched out in front of me. Clear. Solid. I stood there for a moment longer, then went inside. But later, lying in bed, I kept thinking about it. That moment under the light, when there had been nothing, and how for those few seconds, it hadn't been that my shadow was missing. It felt more like the light just wasn't touching me at all. I felt it before I saw anything. Just a quick drop, like the car settled suddenly on its suspension. Not a jolt, not like something hit it. More like a brief heavy weight had pressed down on the roof and then eased off. I looked up immediately. Nothing. The car was still. Engine off, keys out, just sitting there exactly how I'd left it. I was parked in a lay-by just outside Kendall, pulled over to take a break. It was late, around 12:30 a.m., and the road had been empty for miles. I sat there for a second, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. Probably just settling, I muttered. Even as I said it, I knew it didn't feel like that. I shifted slightly in the seat. No movement. No sound. I glanced at the rearview mirror. That's when I saw the glow. Faint. Not bright enough to light anything up. Just a soft patch sitting in the reflection. I frowned and leaned forward a little. The back window looked normal beyond it. Dark. Empty. The glow didn't seem to come from any source I could identify. It didn't look like headlights. Didn't flare. Didn't reflect properly. It just sat there. I twisted in my seat and looked over my shoulder. Nothing. Just the empty road behind me. I turned back to the mirror. The glow was still there. Same size, same position. I reached up and adjusted the mirror slightly. The glow stayed centered, didn't shift relative to the mirror. That made my chest tighten. I sat back slowly. The air inside the car felt heavier. I couldn't hear anything outside. No wind, no distant cars. Just that closed, still silence. Then I felt it again. The same downward pressure. Short. Subtle. Like something pressing on the car and then releasing. The suspension dipped just enough to feel. I froze. The glow in the mirror flickered. Not like a light turning off. More like it shifted slightly. Changed shape for a moment. Then settled again. I swallowed. All right. I reached for the door handle. Didn't open it yet. Just held it. The glow stayed steady. I leaned forward again, trying to get a better look. It wasn't a clear shape, just a soft oval, slightly brighter at the center. I slowly opened the door. The moment it clicked open, the glow disappeared. Completely. The mirror just showed darkness again. I stepped out. Cold air hit me, the kind that feels sharp in your lungs. I stood there beside the car, looking around. Nothing. No lights. No movement. The road stretched out behind me, empty. I walked around to the back of the car, looked through the rear window. Nothing. I stepped back and looked up. The sky was clear, no clouds, stars visible normal. I stood there for a minute, listening. Nothing. No sound at all. Then I got back in, closed the door. The moment it shut, the glow returned, exactly where it had been before, same faint oval in the mirror. My heart started beating faster. I stared at it. The air inside the car felt thicker again. I checked over my shoulder. Nothing. Looked back at the mirror. Still there. Then the pressure came again, longer this time. The car dipped slightly more, not enough to make a noise, just enough to feel, like something had settled onto it. The glow brightened slightly, still faint, but more defined now. I gripped the steering wheel, didn't realize I was doing it. The glow shifted upward in the mirror, just a little, like whatever it was had moved. Then it steadied. The pressure eased. I exhaled slowly. Didn't even realize I'd been holding my breath. "Just go," I said quietly. I turned the key. The engine came to life. The dashboard lit up. The headlights flared on. The glow in the mirror didn't change, didn't react to the light. It just stayed there. I put the car into gear, started to pull out. As the car moved forward, the glow remained fixed in the mirror. Same distance, same position. It didn't fall behind, didn't get closer. It just stayed. After a few seconds, the pressure in the car lifted completely. The air felt normal again. The glow began to fade, slowly, evenly, until it was gone. The mirror showed only the road behind me, empty. I didn't stop. I kept driving, faster than I had been before. Not speeding, but faster. The road felt longer now, quieter. When I finally reached a stretch with streetlights, I slowed down slightly. The normal glow of them felt grounding. I checked the mirror again. Nothing. Just the road. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping. When I parked in my driveway, I sat there for a minute. Engine off. Hands still on the wheel. I looked at the mirror one last time. Nothing there. I got out of the car, walked around to the roof without really thinking, ran my hand across it. The metal felt slightly warm. Not everywhere, just in the center. A patch, roughly oval, like something had been resting there. I felt it before I saw anything. That sudden pressure in your ears, like when a plane changes altitude. It came on all at once while I was just standing there. I stopped mid-step, swallowed. It didn't go away. I tilted my head slightly, trying to clear it. Still there. I looked around. Nothing obvious had changed. I was standing in a small field just behind my house, near a line of trees that separates the back of the estate from open land. It was late, maybe around 11 p.m. No one else out, just me. I'd come out for a walk because I couldn't sleep. The night had been still, now it felt off. I swallowed again. The pressure stayed, not painful, just present, like something had shifted in the air. I took a slow breath and looked up. At first, I didn't see anything, just a dark sky, thin clouds drifting slowly. Then I noticed it, a dim light, high above, moving. Not fast, not slow, just a steady drift. It wasn't blinking, wasn't bright, just a soft, dull glow. I frowned slightly. Satellite, I said under my breath, but it didn't look like one. It wasn't sharp, didn't have that clean pinpoint look. This was softer, like it had edges that didn't quite hold. I kept watching it. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I swallowed.